Rain lashed the cobblestones of Diagon Alley, turning the usually bustling marketplace into a slick, shadowed corridor of shuttered shops and empty archways. Hermione Granger stood beneath the awning of Ollivanders, her breath curling in the chill air as she stared at the charred remains of a lamppost that had not been there yesterday. The metal was twisted like blackened ivy, fused into the stone wall beside it, and the cobbles beneath bore a web of cracks that pulsed faintly with residual magic, silver blue and cold to the touch. She knelt, pulling a thin vial from her coat. With a practiced flick of her wand, she siphoned a thread of the energy into the glass. It coiled inside like trapped lightning, humming at a frequency just beneath hearing. "Same as the others," she murmured, sealing the vial and slipping it into her inner pocket. Prague, Vienna, a quiet village in the Carpathians. Each site bore this same signature, raw, ancient, and unmistakably tied to the Elder Wand. A gust of wind tore through the alley, extinguishing the few lanterns still lit. From the fog beyond, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden beneath the brim of a weathered tricorn hat. He carried no umbrella. Rain sluiced down his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. "You felt it too," Viktor Krum said, his voice low, edged with the weight of old knowing. Hermione straightened, meeting his gaze. 10 years had passed since they'd last spoken, since the quiet, aching distance of post-war farewells. Yet here he stood, as if summoned by the very magic they now hunted. "I felt it in 3 countries," she said. "Spontaneous discharges, no wands involved, no deliberate spell work, just eruptions." He stepped closer, eyes scanning the damage. "Not eruptions, responses." She frowned. "Responses to what?" "To a call." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its cover etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the dim light. "I've been tracking this for weeks. The energy, it isn't just residual. It's seeking, testing, like a root breaking through stone." Hermione's fingers tightened around her wand. "That's impossible." The Elder Wand was returned, laid to rest. "And yet," he said, turning the book in his hands, "the blood remembers. The wood remembers. The wand was never truly gone, only sleeping." A silence settled between them, broken only by the drip of rain from the eaves. She remembered the last time they'd stood this close. Hogwarts, snow falling beyond the windows, the warmth of his hand in hers, brief and unspoken. Now the air between them felt charged, not with romance, but with the gravity of what was returning. "In the Rhodopes," Viktor continued, "there is a cave, a hidden chamber beneath a ruined fortress. My great-uncle, an old wand-maker, hid something there. He called it a splinter, not of the wand itself, but of its soul." Hermione's breath caught. "You believe pieces of it were broken off? Deliberately?" He feared its power would outlive its keepers, so he scattered fragments, bound them to bloodlines, to places of old magic. But now, he hesitated. Now they're waking. A distant crack split the air, like thunder without a storm. Somewhere beyond the leaky cauldron, glass shattered. Hermione looked at him, her mind racing. "If these fragments are responding, they're calling to each other," he finished, "and to whoever is left to answer." She exhaled slowly. "Then we're not just investigating anomalies, we're chasing a resurrection." Viktor nodded, rainwater tracing the strong line of his jaw. "And someone, or something, may already be answering." The morning sun filtered through the high, arched windows of the Ministry of Magic, casting pale gold rectangles across the polished marble floor of the atrium. Hermione Granger stood near the fountain, no longer the gilded statue of magical supremacy, but a simpler, solemn monument to those lost in the war, her fingers tightening around the scroll in her hand. The parchment bore the official seal of the Department of Magical Regulation, stamped in deep indigo wax. She hadn't expected it to come so quickly. Not after years of research, of quiet lectures at Hogwarts, of thinking she was done with field investigations. "Granger." A voice cut through the low hum of morning bustle. It was Edgar Cresswell, Deputy Head of Regulation, his silver-trimmed robe swaying as he approached. His expression was unreadable, neither warm nor unkind, merely efficient. "You've read the briefing?" "I have," Hermione replied, meeting his gaze. "The incidents in Transylvania, raw magic discharging without wands, objects transfiguring spontaneously. It doesn't fit any known pattern." "No, it doesn't," Cresswell said, lowering his voice. "And it's spreading. Last night a broomstick in Prague levitated on its own, and flew 7 miles before bursting into flames. A child in lion conjured a Patronus, without a wand, without training. The boy is 6. Hermione felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Ministry's enchanted air. That's impossible, unless something is amplifying latent magic. Cresswell finished. Or calling it forth. We've reviewed every case since the first report in the Carpathians 3 months ago. All of them cluster along old ley lines, near sites of historical wandcraft significance. We believe it's tied to remnants of the Elder Wand. Her breath caught, but the Elder Wand was buried with Harry. He saw to it. He did, Cresswell said, but wands, especially that one, leave echoes. Fragments. Traces of core material, splinters hidden in relics, bloodlines that carried even a whisper of its power. We think something is awakening them, pulling at the threads. And you want me to lead the investigation? We want you to understand it. You've studied wand lore more deeply than anyone in this department, and you've history with the subject. Hermione looked down at the scroll. Her name was at the top, followed by the title, Task Force for Anomalous Magical Resonance. Below it, a list of classified sites, coordinates, and one name that made her pulse stutter, Viktor Krum. Consultant, Durmstrang Institute. Expert in Balkan magical artifacts and ancient wand traditions. She hadn't spoken to Viktor in nearly a decade, not since that quiet night after the war, when he'd stood by her at a memorial in Sofia, his hand briefly brushing hers before he returned to the north, to silence and scholarship. She remembered his voice, low and careful, saying, "Magic this old. It does not like to be forgotten." Krum has already confirmed, Cresswell said, watching her closely. He's found similar disturbances near the ruins of an old wand-maker's enclave in the Rhodopes. Claims there's a fragment buried there, possibly from Ignotus Peverel's original craft. We don't know if it's true, but if it is, and if these fragments are resonating, we could be facing something beyond control. Hermione exhaled slowly, the weight of memory pressing against her ribs. The Elder Wand had brought nothing but ruin, power sought, stolen, abused, and now its ghost was stirring. "I'll take the assignment," she said. Cresswell nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "You leave for Bulgaria tomorrow. Krum will meet you at the Vitosha Pass. And Granger, be careful. Power like this, it doesn't just awaken, it chooses." She watched him walk away, the scroll still clenched in her hand. Around her, witches and wizards moved through the atrium, unaware, unprepared. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, or hidden in forgotten vaults, pieces of a terrible legacy were humming to life, and she would have to decide what to do when they finally spoke. Rain tapped steadily against the high-arched windows of the Department of Mysteries, a quiet rhythm that did little to soothe the tension in the chamber below. Hermione Granger stood at the edge of the orb room, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the shimmering fragment suspended in mid-air. It hovered within a containment sphere of enchanted silver filigree, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The shard was no larger than a quill tip, bone white, veined with threads of gold, but it hummed with a resonance that made the air taste metallic. "It's not possible," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. The Elder Wand was broken, buried. Harry saw to it. Dawlish adjusted his spectacles, frowning. "We found this embedded in the foundation stones of an old watchtower in the Carpathians. Local witches reported tremors, objects flying, spells reversing mid-cast. When our team arrived, they found the stone cracked open from within. No spell could have done that." "Not cleanly." Hermione stepped closer, careful not to breach the containment field. The fragment responded, just slightly, its pulse quickening. A shiver ran up her spine. "It's reacting to me, or to magic near it," said a low voice from the doorway. She turned. Viktor Krum stood in the shadowed arch, his coat damp from the rain, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He carried a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder, and in his hand, a wand of dark wood. Walnut, she guessed, its tip glowing faintly blue. "You came," she said. He nodded, stepping forward. "You said it was urgent, and that it was him." Hermione hesitated. Not Harry, not directly, but the wand that had once chosen him. The one that had passed through so many hands. Antioch Peverell, Gellert Grindelwald, Dumbledore, Malfoy, Harry, and then at last, laid to rest. "I didn't believe it either," she admitted. but the energy signature matches wand core resonance patterns from the Battle of Hogwarts. Specifically, the Elder Wand's final discharge. Only, this isn't residual, it's active. Krum moved to the sphere, studying the fragment with the focus of a man who had spent decades tracing the bloodlines of lost magic. He reached into his satchel and withdrew a thin brass rod etched with runes. As he passed it near the field, the device trembled. "This is not just a piece of wood," he said quietly. "It's a seed." "A seed?" He met her eyes. In ancient Bulgarian texts, the Elder Wand was never called a wand. They called it Duhovnia Koren, the spirit root, a living thing bound to the blood of its bearers. They believed it could regenerate, not from a single branch, but from fragments, scattered, forgotten, sleeping. Hermione's breath caught. "You're saying it's growing back." "Not the wand," he corrected. "The will of it, the magic remembers. And if it's waking, it's calling to what remains: blood, bone, memory." A silence settled between them, thick with implication. Outside, thunder rolled across the London skyline. The fragment pulsed again, stronger now, and for a fleeting second Hermione heard it, not with her ears, but in her mind. A whisper thin and cold as winter wind. "Mine, mine, mine." She stepped back, heart pounding. "We thought we'd ended the danger, that destroying it would end the hunger." Krum lowered the brass rod. "You cannot destroy desire with fire, only answer it." She looked at him, really looked, his weathered face, the quiet strength in his stance, the way his fingers curled protectively around his own wand, as if bracing for something unseen. "What if it's not calling to be ruled?" she whispered, "but to be buried again? Then we must find all the pieces first," he said, "before someone else does." The wind howled through the cracked shutters of Viktor Krum's mountain cottage, rattling the loose pane of glass like a persistent ghost. Snow dusted the stone steps outside, and the fire within sputtered low, casting long shadows across the room, filled with scrolls, ancient books bound in leather, and shards of wood wrapped in velvet cloth, fragments of wands long discarded or destroyed. Viktor sat hunched over a crumbling text written in a dialect of Aramaic only 3 living wizards could read, his fingers tracing the fader ink, when an owl, battered by the storm, slammed into the window. He startled, then rose quickly, opening the latch just enough to let the bird tumble inside. It shook itself, feathers damp and matted, and extended a leg bearing a scroll sealed with a familiar crest. The Ministry of Magic, Department of Mysteries. But the handwriting on the front was not official. It was precise, looping, unmistakable. Hermione. He broke the seal with care, unrolling the parchment slowly, as if afraid the words might vanish if handled too roughly. "Viktor," it began, "I know it's been years, and I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent. There have been incidents, unexplained surges of magic across the continent. A village in Transcarpathia reported a well boiling over with light. In Normandy, a wandless child summoned a storm. In Prague, a dead oak burst into bloom, and then to ash in the span of a breath. The Ministry's tracing spells keep pointing to one origin, residual signatures tied to the Elder Wand. But it's not just echoes, it's waking." Viktor exhaled, the firelight flickering across his sharp features. He read on. "I've reviewed every text I can find, all Evander's notes, the Gaunt family records, even the forbidden chapters from the Black Archive. But you've spent the last decade studying what others have forgotten. You understand the weight of wands, not just their power. I need your help. If the Elder Wand is stirring, if its pieces are calling to something, someone, then we may be facing more than a magical anomaly. We may be facing a legacy that refuses to die." He folded the letter and held it against his palm, feeling the faint warmth of recent magic in the ink. It had taken 3 days for the owl to reach him through the storm. She must have sent it the moment she confirmed her suspicions. He remembered her. How could he not? In the library at Hogwarts, brows furrowed over books twice as thick as her forearm, the way she'd bite her lip when frustrated, the fierce light in her eyes when she solved a riddle no one else could see, and later at the Yule Ball, how she had looked in that dress, how he'd wanted to say more than he had. Now, years later, she was still solving riddles. The world didn't even know her dangerous. He walked to the back of the cottage, where a wooden chest lay beneath the tapestry of the Black Lake. Inside, wrapped in cloth stitched with rules of preservation, was a shard no longer than his thumb, a sliver of elder wood, dark as dried blood, humming faintly when touched. He had found it near the ruins of an old Bulgarian monastery, where a hermit once claimed to have buried a wand, too proud to serve. The shard did not glow, it did not crackle, but sometimes in the silence just before dawn, it whispered, and in the last moon cycle, the whisper had grown louder. He returned to the letter. "Meet me in Vienna," she wrote. "There's a cafe near St. Stephen's, tucked between two bookshops, the kind you'd never notice unless you were looking. I'll be there in 3 days' time. Come, Viktor. Please." He looked out the window. The storm had eased. Snow fell gently now, blanketing the peaks in white. Somewhere beyond the mountains, magic was rising, not in fury, not in war, but in memory. He lit a fresh candle, dipped his quill in ink, and wrote a single word in response. "Coming." The wind off the Black Sea cut through Hermione's cloak like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Snow swirled in erratic spirals around the towering spires of Durmstrang, its dark stone walls slick with frost. She pulled her scarf tighter, breath curling in white plumes as she stepped across the frozen courtyard. The castle loomed ahead, a fortress of ancient magic and guarded secrets, its iron gates groaning open just enough to admit her. A figure waited beneath the arched entrance, tall and still, his silhouette stark against the torchlight. Viktor Krum turned as she approached, his face weathered by northern winters, but his dark eyes as steady as ever. "Hermione," he said, voice low. "You came. I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she admitted, brushing snow from her shoulders. "Durmstrang isn't exactly neutral ground for someone with your history." He gave a small smile, almost wry. "I am Hessmaster. Not every tradition must be broken, only the ones that should be." They walked in silence through the echoing halls, torches flickering in iron sconces, the scent of damp stone and old wood thick in the air. Portraits of stern-faced wizards watched them pass, their eyes following with suspicion. The castle felt heavier than she remembered, as if it carried centuries in its bones. "You said you had something," she prompted, breaking the quiet. "Not something," Viktor corrected. "Someone." He led her down a narrow staircase, spiraling deep beneath the main fortress. The air grew colder, the walls lined with runes carved into the rock. At the bottom, a single door stood sealed with a mark she didn't recognize, a serpent coiled around a broken wand. Viktor pressed his palm against it. The stone shimmered, then dissolved like mist. Inside, the chamber was dim, lit only by a floating orb of blue light. At its center stood a pedestal, and upon it, a glass case. Beneath the glass lay a slender shard of wood, no longer than her hand, pale and veined with silver. It pulsed faintly, like a dying heartbeat. Hermione stepped forward, her breath catching. "That's not possible." "It is," Viktor said. "A fragment of the Elder Wand. Not the whole, but part of it. Hidden here since the 18th century by a Durmstrang master who feared what would happen if it were ever whole again." She reached out, then stopped. "It's warm. The magic isn't dormant. It's waiting." She turned to him. "Why show me this now?" "Because the anomalies, the bursts of wild magic across the continent. They're not random. They're echoes. Calls. This fragment, it responds to them. And last night, for the first time in decades, it bled light." Hermione frowned. "Bled?" A silver mist seeped from the fracture. Like breath, it formed words. In Elder Futhark. I had to consult the old grimoires to translate. He hesitated. It said, "He who bears the bone shall wake the storm." The bone? She looked back at the shard, like the resurrection stone. The Deathly Hallows, are they connected in ways we didn't understand? "Perhaps," Viktor said. "Or perhaps it speaks of bloodline. The Peveril name is not just legend. There are descendants, hidden, some here in the north, others scattered, and someone is awaking them." Hermione's mind raced. Then this isn't just about containing magic. It's about inheritance. Someone is being called, or being used. Viktor nodded. And if the wand is reassembled, willingly or not, it may not wait for a master. It may choose its own. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, though the sky had been clear moments before. The shard pulsed again, stronger this time. She looked at Viktor, really looked at him. The lines at his eyes, the quiet strength at his stance, the way he'd kept this secret for years, waiting. "You've known about this for a long time." "I waited," he said softly, "for someone who would ask the right questions. For you." And in that moment, the weight of the past settled between them. Not just the war, not just the Triwizard Tournament, or stolen glances across a great hall, but a trust that had never fully faded, only slept. Like the wand, like the magic, like something older, deeper, stirring beneath the ice. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the cobblestones of the abandoned village, nestled in the Carpathians, its sound muffled by the thick canopy of ancient pines that ringed the valley. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the damp wool heavy against her shoulders. Frost curled along the edges of broken windows, and silvered the cracked stone of what had once been a watchtower. She exhaled, watching her breath ghost into the cold air. Viktor stood a few paces ahead, his silhouette sharp against the fading twilight. He crouched beside a fissure in the earth, where the ground had split open, as though torn by some unseen force. His fingers brushed the edge of something dark and splintered half-buried in the soil. "This is no ordinary wood," he said, voice low, with the quiet certainty that had always anchored her during their younger years. "Rowan, but not whole." Hermione stepped closer, pulling out her wand. She hesitated, then murmured, "Lumos," letting the soft glow spill over the fragment. It was no longer than her hand, narrow and blackened as though scorched, yet untouched by decay. The grain shimmered faintly, like light beneath still water. Her breath caught. "It's warm." Viktor nodded, lifting it with care. He wrapped it in a strip of cloth embroidered with runes before tucking it into the satchel at his side. Not warm, alive, dormant perhaps, but not dead. They stood in silence a moment, the weight of what they'd found settling between them. The Ministry had dismissed the tremors in Transylvania as magical drift, residual echoes from old spells, but this was not drift. This was a piece of something deliberate, something whole once. "I thought the Elder Wand destroyed," Hermione whispered, more to herself than to him. "Destroyed?" Viktor turned to face her, eyes dark and unreadable in the dim light. "Or hidden?" "Broken into parts, buried where only blood and memory could find them," she frowned. "Blood." He hesitated, then unfastened a small locket from around his neck. Inside, a sliver of parchment bore a name written in archaic script. Krum, but older, the ink faded into brown. Beneath it, a drop of dried crimson, preserved by magic. "My grandfather kept this," he said our family was not just keepers of strength, but of balance, that we were bound to watch for the return of the death stick, not to wield it, but to guard against it. Hermione stared at the locket, then at the satchel where the fragment lay. "And now you think it's waking." "Not waking," Viktor corrected. "Answering. Something has called it, or someone." A gust of wind howled through the ruins, and the trees bent like mortars at a grave. From the forest's edge, a flicker, blue, then gone, like a spark swallowed by shadow. Hermione raised her wand. "Did you see that?" Viktor was already moving, silent as a wolf. He stopped at the tree line, brushing aside a curtain of ivy. Beneath the roots, half swallowed by earth, lay a second fragment, this one carved with a spiral that pulsed faintly, once, before stilling. "It knows we're here," he said. She joined him, her fingers brushing the spiral. A whisper threaded into her mind, not words, but a sensation, longing, ancient, and sharp, like a voice calling from the bottom of a well. "We can't take it yet," she said, pulling back. "It's not ready, or we're not." Viktor looked at her, the years between them collapsing for a heartbeat. "You always knew when to wait." She managed a small smile. "And you always knew when to act." He tucked the second fragment into the satchel with the first. "Then we wait, but not long. The wand remembers its pieces, and soon it will begin to call them home." Rain tapped a slow, steady rhythm against the glass panes of the archive of silence spells, a forgotten repository nestled in the Carpathian foothills, where parchment never yellowed and ink never faded. The air smelled of myrrh and damp stone, thick with the quiet hum of preserved magic. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, her breath curling in faint wisps as she stepped across the threshold, Viktor close behind. His boots echoed too loudly on the flagstones, and he paused, instinctively softening his step as if entering a tomb. A frail figure sat at a long obsidian desk, quill in hand, writing in a language that shimmered slightly at the edges. His robes were the color of dried blood, stitched with silver threads that pulsed like veins. When he looked up, his eyes were milky with cataracts, yet they seemed to see through more than just skin. "You are later than the stars predicted," the old scribe said, voice like parchment tearing. Hermione hesitated. "We came as soon as we could." "The anomalies are worsening. Lightning in Prague with no storm? A river in Transylvania boiling at midnight. The ministry can't explain it." The scribe dipped his quill, wrote 2 words, then let the ink sink into the page like water into sand. "Because they look for a wand. There is no wand, not as you know it." Viktor stepped forward, his accent thick with urgency. "We traced the disturbances to the old Balkan wards, places where the Elder Wand was said to have passed. But the traces, they are not whole. They are pieces." The scribe smiled, a thin cracking of lips. "Good. You see the truth before it speaks. The Elder Wand was never lost. It was divided. Not broken, ritualized." Hermione's pulse quickened. Divided how? Centuries ago, after Antioch Peveril's death, the wand's power became too great a lure. Kings, warlocks, even saints sought it. Not to protect, but to own. So the last keeper, a monk of the Black Chapter, performed the sundering. He split the wand into 3 parts: the core, the shaft, and the sigil, the soul, the body, the name. Each was hidden in bloodline vaults, guarded not by spells, but by silence. Viktor frowned. "And the bloodlines died, or so we thought." The scribe turned a bony hand, palm up. A thin trail of blood welled from his fingertip, dripping onto the desk. Where it landed, letters flared in ancient runes. "I'm the last archivist. My blood carries the memory of the shaft. But others remain. The core sleeps in a line thought extinct, a descendant of the Peverils, perhaps. The sigil, that is written in names not spoken for centuries." Hermione swallowed. "And now the pieces are calling to each other. Not calling, waking." The scribe closed his hand, the blood vanishing. The sundering was meant to last a millennium, but blood remembers, magic breathes, and someone, has stirred the silence. A chill ran through the room, deeper than the mountain's cold. Hermione thought of the reports, the flash of elder wood in a Romanian ruin, the boy in Salzburg who spoke in runes he'd never learned, the sudden surge in wandless magic across the continent. It wasn't chaos, it was resonance. "Why now?" she asked. The scribe leaned back. "Perhaps the world is ready, or perhaps it is not, but the pieces know each other. They seek reunion. And if they join without a true keeper, one who does not crave power, then the wand will not serve, it will consume." Viktor looked at Hermione, his dark eyes heavy with understanding. "Then we find the others. Before someone uses them." The scribe nodded. "Yes, but beware, the bloodlines are not always where they seem, and some who guard the fragments do not know what they carry. The past hides in plain sight, in old names, in heirlooms, in scars." He reached beneath the desk and pulled out a small vial, filled with a sliver of wood, suspended in amber fluid. "This is a splinter of the shaft, not whole. But it will tremble near the other parts. Use it wisely." Hermione took the vial. The wood inside pulsed once faintly, like a heartbeat. Outside, the rain ceased. A single shaft of moonlight cut through the clouds, striking the archived spire. Somewhere, deep in the bones of the earth, something ancient stirred, and listened. Rain drummed steadily against the window panes of the small Bulgarian inn, its rhythm steady and low, like a heartbeat beneath stone. Hermione sat hunched over a stack of yellowed parchments, her fingers smudged with ink, her hair escaping its braid in frayed tendrils. Maps of Eastern Europe were pinned to the wall, threaded with red string connecting dots, each one a site of unexplained magical surges. She rubbed her temples, the weight of sleepless nights pressing behind her eyes. Across the table, Viktor Krum turned a page in a leather-bound tome, his brow furrowed in concentration. The firelight carved deep shadows along his jaw, accentuating the quiet intensity that had always drawn her, even years ago at Hogwarts. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "These places," he said slowly, his voice low and measured, "they are not random, Hermione, not one." She leaned forward. "I know, but it's not just proximity to old magical sites. It's something more specific. Look," she tapped the map. "Prague, 1483. Warsaw, 1561. Transylvania, 1629. Each had a recorded duel, wizard against wizard, where one died by unnatural magic. And now, centuries later, something stirs." Viktor nodded. "Duels of consequence, not schoolyard quarrels. These were battles for power, for honor, for survival." He traced a finger along the edge of the book, and in each, the victor was said to have claimed a wand, sometimes by force, sometimes by blood. A chill ran through her, though the room was warm. "You think the Elder Wand remembers?" "It remembers," he corrected softly, "or something remembers it. The magic lingers where it passed, like echoes in stone." She exhaled, staring at the map again. The pattern was undeniable. Crimson threads wove a tapestry across the continent, all converging toward one region. The Carpathians, a place of old forests and forgotten monasteries, where wizards once vanished without trace. "This isn't just residual energy," she murmured. "It's directional, purposeful. It's like the wand is trying to call something back, or someone." Viktor closed the book with a soft thud. "Or perhaps it calls to those who carry its shadow. Bloodlines, heirs of those who once wielded it, or tried to." She looked at him sharply. "You think there are descendants still alive? People tied to those duels?" He shrugged, but his gaze was distant. "Magic does not die easily, especially not magic like this. It hides, it waits, and sometimes it chooses." Outside, thunder rolled, and the candle on the table flickered. Hermione reached for the newest report, a ministry dispatch from a ruined castle in northern Serbia. A shepherd had seen lights in the sky, heard voices in a language no one could name. Animals fled the valley for 3 days. "It happened again last night," she said, handing him a parchment. "At the site of the duel between Radovan the Hollow and Mira of Vitosha. Both dead, wand lost, and now energy surges. Unstable. Powerful," Viktor read in silence, then looked up. "Mira was said to have touched the Elder Wand briefly, before she died. Her bloodline was thought extinct, but in the mountains old families keep secrets." Hermione felt the stir of something deeper than logic, a pull like a string tied around her ribs. "We need to go there, to the ruins. If there's a pattern, if the magic is responding to something, we might find a clue, a remnant, a name." He studied her for a long moment. "It is dangerous, the magic. It does not welcome seekers, it tests them." "I know," she said, meeting his gaze. "But if the Elder Wand is awakening, we can't wait for the ministry to catch up. If it falls into the wrong hands, or if it chooses vengeance over peace." Her voice trailed off. Viktor reached across the table, his hand briefly covering hers. A quiet gesture, brief but certain. "Then we find the truth," he said. "Before it finds us." And in the flickering light, with rain whispering against the glass, the map between them seemed to pulse, alive with the past, and the promise of something yet to rise. The wind howled through the jagged peaks like a chorus of forgotten voices, biting through layers of enchanted wool and dragon hide as Hermione Granger tightened her scarf and pressed forward. Snow crunched beneath her boots, each step deliberate, each breath a silver cloud that vanished into the alpine dusk. Behind her, Viktor Krum moved with the quiet precision of a man used to silence, his dark coat flapping slightly in the gusts, his face half hidden beneath a fur-lined hood. They had been climbing for hours, following a map etched onto a fragment of vellum older than Hogwarts itself. "This way," Viktor said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. He pointed toward a narrow crevice framed by ice-laden rocks. "The tomb is not far, buried where the glacier split during the Great Freeze." Hermione nodded, adjusting the satchel slung across her chest. Inside, a compass spun erratically, its needle drawn not to north, but to something deeper, something buried. "The resonance is stronger now. I can feel it in my teeth." Viktor glanced at her, his dark eyes reflective. "You always could sense magic differently. Not just know it, feel it." She offered a small smile, fleeting, and you always knew how to say things without saying them. They stepped into the crevice, the world narrowing to stone and frost. The air grew still, unnaturally so. Even the wind seemed reluctant to follow. Hermione lit her wand, the soft blue glow, revealing walls carved with runes, ancient, angular, older than the Latin of Roman wizards. Her fingers traced one glyph, and a shiver ran up her spine. "These aren't just protective wards," she murmured. "They're a warning, or a lament." Viktor stepped past her, muttering a phrase in Old Bulgarian, a dialect spoken only by the earliest Durmstrang scholars. The runes flared crimson, then dimmed, as if recognizing his bloodline. The slab of ice groaned and slid aside, revealing a passage lined with frozen crystals that pulsed faintly, like sleeping hearts. "You knew that would work?" Hermione asked, following close behind. "My grandfather spoke of this place, said the wand's pieces were not lost, they were hidden, by those who feared what would happen if they were whole again." She hesitated. "And what do you fear, Viktor?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a slender piece of wood, a shard no longer than his palm, pale as bone, veined with silver. The first fragment they'd recovered, found beneath the ruins of a monastery in the Rhodops. It hummed softly now, vibrating toward the depths of the passage. "It is not the power I fear," he said at last. "It is the choice, to take it or to leave it." The passage opened into a cavern sealed in ice, its ceiling glittering with trapped starlight. At its center stood a pedestal of black stone, and atop it, a second shard, this one embedded in a block of glacial blue ice. It was larger than the first, its surface etched with microscopic spirals that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. Hermione approached slowly, her breath catching. "In this one, it's calling, not to us, to it." She nodded at the fragment in Viktor's hand. He stepped beside her. "They want to be whole. What should they?" She turned to him. "The Elder Wand was never meant to be stable. It thrives on conflict, on conquest. Even in pieces, it draws power, disturbs the balance. These anomalies across Europe, they're not accidents. They're symptoms." Viktor stared at the ice-locked shard. "And yet, what if it does not seek mastery? What if it seeks rest?" She frowned. "You think it's alive?" "No," he said. "But I think it remembers. And memory, it can be a kind of life." A low rumble echoed through the cavern. Ice cracked along the walls. The shard in Viktor's hand flared, and the one in the ice answered with a pulse of light that sent ripples through the frozen air. Hermione reached out, not to take it, but to touch the ice. "If we remove it, we might awaken something we can't control. And if we leave it," Viktor said, "the mountain may not hold it forever." Outside, the wind returned, fiercer than before, and deep beneath their feet, something ancient stirred in the dark. The wind howled across the frozen lake like a chorus of forgotten voices, tearing at the edges of Hermione's woolen cloak as she stepped onto the brittle ice. Beneath her boots, the surface cracked faintly, a sound like breaking glass swallowed too quickly by the storm. Viktor moved ahead, his broad frame cutting through the gale with quiet determination, wand raised. The runes etched into the ice pulsed a dull blue, flickering with each recitation of the incantation. He murmured under his breath. "This is wrong," Hermione said, her breath a white plume in the dark. "The resonance. It's not just residual magic. It's reacting to us." Viktor turned, snow caught in the dark strands of his hair. "It knows blood," he said simply. "Not just any blood. Blood that's touched the wand, or its shards." She swallowed. The fragments they'd recovered, 3 slivers of obsidian black wood, wrapped in silver filigree, were sewn into the lining of her coat, warm against her ribs despite the cold. They had found them in places no one had thought to look, beneath a gravestone in Transylvanian soil, inside a hollowed-out grimoire in a Krakow archive, and most recently, fused into the antlers of a dead elk in a Finnish forest. Each piece hummed when near the others, and now, here at the heart of the Carpathian wilds, they sang. "We should have waited," she said. "This isn't just wand lore, Viktor. This feels like a ritual." "And what is wand lore?" he replied, voice low. "If not blood and memory bound in wood." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small vial of powdered moonstone. "They said the last master died screaming, that his bones turned to glass, but they never buried him. Not truly." Hermione frowned. "You never told me that. I did not want you to come if you knew." She stared at him, wind stinging her eyes. "You think he's still here?" "Not alive," Viktor said, "but not gone." He poured the powder onto the ice, forming a circle around the central rune. Hermione followed, drawing her wand and whispering the binding phrase they had pieced together from a torn page in an Ottoman-era spellbook. The air thickened. The cracks beneath their feet spread like veins, glowing now with a silver light that crawled toward the center. And then, silence. The wind ceased. The lake held its breath. From the ice a figure rose, not solid, not quite ghost, more like smoke shaped into a man tall and gaunt, draped in robes that might have once been magnificent. His face was long, eyes hollow, but when they opened, they burned with cold fire. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply was, and the weight of centuries pressed against Hermione's chest. Viktor dropped to one knee, not in fear but in respect. "Ivelo," he said. "We mean no desecration." The name cracked through the silence like a whip. The figure's head tilted as if considering. Then, a voice, not from his mouth, but from the ice, the wind, the very bones of the earth. "Why do you wake me?" Hermione stepped forward, heart pounding. "We're not trying to claim the wand. We're trying to stop it. The fragments, they're causing chaos. Magic unraveling, lives in danger. The wand chooses," the voice echoed. "And it has chosen to remember." "It's not choosing," she said. "It's bleeding, and we're trying to heal it." A long pause. The spectral master drifted closer, his form shifting like mist over stone. He reached out a hand, not touching her, but passing through the air near her coat, near the fragments. A shudder ran through the ice. "7 masters," he whispered. 7 sins. I was the last to wield it whole, and the first to understand. Its power was never in domination. It was in surrender. Hermione's breath caught. "Then help us, not to wield it, to lay it down." The figure looked at her, then at Viktor. For the first time, something like sorrow flickered in those aged eyes. "Then break the chain," he said. "Not with fire, not with force, with truth." Rain fell in silver sheets over the black forest, drumming against the ancient oaks like whispered warnings long forgotten. Hermione stood beneath the crooked bough of the lightning-struck beech, her breath curling in pale wisps as she stared at the fissure in the earth before her. It pulsed faintly, a vein of blue light threading through the cracked soil like a heartbeat. Her fingers trembled around the charred fragment of hawthorn wood she had pulled from the ruins of a forgotten chapel in Transylvania, its grain etched with runes that hadn't been spoken since the time of Antioch Averroes. "Do not touch it again," Viktor said, his voice low and rough like stones grinding beneath a river. He stood a few paces behind, shoulders hunched against the cold, his dark eyes fixed not her but on the fissure. "It listens when you touch it." She turned, rainwater slipping down her temple. "It responded to my magic, Viktor, not yours." "That means something. That means it knows your hunger," he replied, stepping forward. His boots crunched on frostbitten moss. "The Elder Wand does not choose. It finds the one who wants it most, not the one who needs it." A silence settled between them, broken only by the distant cry of a nightjar. Hermione exhaled slowly. He wasn't wrong. She had felt it, a pull beneath her ribs when the fragment flared, a whisper against her thoughts that wasn't her own. Not a voice, not exactly, more like a memory that didn't belong to her, pressing against the edges of her mind. "It showed me something," she admitted. "In the chapel, a man, pale, with hollow eyes, kneeling before another who held a wand of white wood. He said, 'Mastery is not taken, it is given. And then it is broken.'" Viktor's jaw tightened. "I know that tale. It is not a memory. It is a warning." "From who?" "From the wand," he said quietly. "Or what remains of it." She frowned. "Longs don't speak. This one does," he said, "to those who have spilled blood for it. Or love." The words settled like ash. Hermione looked down at the fragment in her palm. The runes began to glow again, faintly, as if stirred by his voice. A breath of wind snaked through the trees, and suddenly the fissure in the earth deepened. The blue light surged, and from it rose a shape. Not solid, not quite, a silhouette of smoke and starlight, tall and gaunt, with eyes like dying embers. Hermione stepped back. Viktor did not. The shadow tilted its head, and when it spoke, the voice was layered. Many voices, old and broken, speaking as one. You seek mastery, daughter of reason. But mastery is not in the hand, it is in the surrender. The first master died for love, the second for pride, the third for nothing at all. Hermione swallowed. We're not seeking mastery, we're trying to stop the fractures, the surges. People are getting hurt. The shadow laughed, a dry, rustling sound. You cannot stop what has already awakened. The blood calls to blood. The wand remembers, and it remembers betrayal. Whose betrayal? Viktor asked, his voice firm. The shadow turned to him. The one who buried the truth, who sealed the lineage. You know his name, Seeker. You carry his eyes. Viktor went very still. Hermione looked between them. What is it talking about? He didn't answer. His gaze remained locked on the shadow haunted. The figure stretched a smoky hand toward the hawthorn fragment. The wand does not wish to be whole. It wishes to be judged. To be asked, was it worth the cost? And if we don't ask, Hermione whispered, then it will ask through others, through children who wake screaming with magic they did not earn, through wands that snap in loyal hands, through love turned to ash. The wind howled. The fissure sealed shut with a sound like a closing tomb, and the shadow was gone. Only the rain remained, and the silence, and the weight of words that had not finished speaking. Rain tapped a quiet rhythm against the window pane of Hermione's study, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that made London feel smaller, more intimate. She sat at her desk, fingers tracing the edge of an unmarked envelope, sealed with a wax sigil she hadn't seen in years, a phoenix in flight, wings outstretched, the emblem of a trust long thought closed. The ministry's archival courier had delivered it that morning without explanation, only a note, found in the restricted pensive vault, designated for your eyes only. She hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. Dumbledore's voice still echoed in her dreams sometimes, gentle, probing, layered with meaning she hadn't grasped until long after his passing. And now, a letter. Not through the normal channels, not with a signature or a date, just her name, written in that familiar looping script. She broke the seal. The parchment was thin, almost translucent, as though it had been folded and refolded across decades. But the ink remained dark, vivid. My dear Hermione, if you are reading this, then the time has come when the past must speak, even if only in whispers. I write not as headmaster, nor as strategist, but as one who believed always in the wisdom of the curious mind. You have that mind. Sharper now, I suspect, than ever before. She exhaled slowly, pressing her thumb to the corner of the page as if to steady it. And herself, you have begun to follow the traces of the Elder Wand, have you not? I see it in the ministry's hushed reports, in the flicker of wand-light over the Carpathians, in the way Viktor Krum has returned to your life. The wand does not simply break, it remembers, and it calls. Her breath caught. How could he have known? The investigation had only begun 3 weeks ago, and Viktor's involvement had been her decision, private, unrecorded. The wand's power is not in its wood or core, but in the chain of hands that have held it. Each bearer leaves a mark, not on the object, but on the magic that flows through it. Like ripples in still water, their choices linger. Grindelwald's pride, my own hesitation, even Harry's refusal to wield it as a weapon, each has shaped what the wand is now becoming. She leaned back, the firelight casting long shadows across the room. Dumbledore had always spoken in metaphors, but this felt different. This was not riddle. This was warning. There is a vault beneath Hogwarts, older than the school itself, where fragments of ancient wands were once interred. Not for safety, for mourning. The wand-makers of old believed that powerful objects, when broken, should not be discarded, but laid to rest with ritual. But the Elder Wand was never buried. It passed. It endured. And because of that, its spirit is restless. A chill curled at the base of her spine. She thought of the reports, spontaneous conjurations in abandoned Bulgarian monasteries, spells cast in dead languages, lights moving without casters. Viktor had called them echoes. Dumbledore called them something else. Viktor Krum's bloodline is not accidental to this. His ancestors were guardians, silent, sworn, forgotten. They did not seek the wand, but they felt its pulse. You trust him. That is well. But do not mistake trust for safety. The wand will test you both. It will offer power cloaked as necessity. It will whisper that only restoration can bring peace. Do not believe it. She closed her eyes. Viktor's quiet intensity, the way he studied old grimoires like they were prayers, the way he looked at her, not with longing, but with understanding, had begun to feel like an anchor. But now doubt seeped in. Was he drawn to this for the same reasons she was? Or was there something deeper, older, pulling him? The greatest magic is not in mastery, but in surrender. To lay down power is harder than to claim it. When the time comes, and it will, you must decide not what the wand wants, but what the world needs. The letter ended without a signature. Only a single line, written in slightly smudged ink, as if added in haste. Trust the choice you make in silence. That is the truest magic of all. She sat for a long time, the rain still falling, the letter resting in her hands like something alive. Outside, London slept, unaware of the storm gathering in the bones of old magic. Inside, Hermione made a decision, not yet spoken, not yet formed in words, but taking root. She would write to Viktor. Tonight. Rain lashed against the high, narrow windows of the Villa Archive, a forgotten repository tucked into the Carpathian foothills, its stone walls slick with moss and centuries of mountain damp. Inside, the air smelled of vellum, iron filings, and the faint metallic tang of old magic. Hermione traced the edge of a crumbling manuscript with gloved fingers, her breath visible in the chill. The ink shimmered where her torchlight touched it. Words in a dialect of ancient Bulgarian mixed with runes, no modern linguist could parse without aid. "It's here," Viktor said, voice low. He stood across the long table, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a wand of blackthorn held vertically above an open grimoire. A thread of silver light spiraled from its tip, coiling around the page like smoke. This is not just legend, it speaks of a pact. The Hallows were never meant to be wielded apart. Hermione leaned closer. A pact? Between the Hallows themselves? No, he corrected. Between their first bearers. Not owners, heirs. There is a difference. She exhaled slowly. Go on. He tapped the grimoire with his free hand. Death did not give them freely. He bound them, cloak, stone, wand, to 3 souls who swore an oath, not of conquest, but of balance. To guard, not to use. The Elder Wand was never meant to be a weapon. It was a key, a steward of magic's edge. Hermione frowned. Then why did it corrupt so many? Because the pact was broken, Viktor said. When the first line died or fled or failed, the bond frayed. The wand remembered the oath, but no one remembered the Uthi. Power without purpose becomes hunger. A silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the torch and the distant groan of the wind through the peaks. Hermione turned the page carefully. Beneath a diagram of 3 interlocking circles, each inscribed with a Hallows symbol, was a passage written in a looping script that seemed to pulse faintly. It's written in blood, she murmured. Not just any blood, Viktor replied. The oath required a sacrifice. A drop from each bearer, sealed in the vow. The magic would endure only as long as their descendants upheld the balance. She looked up sharply. Descendants? You think there are still heirs? Not heirs in name, he said, voice thoughtful, but in blood. The line of Ignotus, the Peverils. We know Harry had no claim, not truly, but the cloak chose him. Why? Because he was worthy, she said simply, or because the pact was calling. Viktor countered. Magic does not forget blood, and the wand, it surges across Europe. They are not random. They follow old paths, places where the bearers once walked, where their blood was spilled. Hermione closed her eyes, remembering the reports. A boy in Prague who conjured fire from nothing, only to vanish the next day. A woman in Transylvania who raised her dead brother for 7 breaths before collapsing. A forest in Bavaria where time stuttered, looping for 3 hours. All within 100 miles of known Peveril outposts. They're waking up, she whispered. The blood remembers, Viktor said. And the Hallows, they are searching. She opened her eyes. Then we have to find who's left, the ones who carry the oath in their veins." He nodded. "But be careful, Hermione. If the wand finds its true heir, it will demand the pact be renewed, or fulfilled. And if it can't be, then it may try to end what was begun." He hesitated. "Some say the final act of the pact was not to rule death, but to release it." She stared at him. "You're saying the hollows were meant to be destroyed?" "No," he said softly. "I'm saying they were meant to let go." A gust shook the tower. The torch flickered. The silver thread from Viktor's wand trembled, then snapped. The grimoire snapped shut with a sound like a sigh. And far below, in the dark soil of the valley, something ancient shifted in its sleep. The air in the Carpathian study was thick, with the scent of aged parchment and damp stone, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears like wool. Outside, wind whispered through ancient pines, but inside, only the soft flicker of candlelight disturbed the stillness. Viktor stood at the center of the room, his broad frame hunched slightly over a shallow obsidian bowl filled with powdered moonstone and silver shavings. His hands moved with deliberate grace, tracing patterns in the air above the mixture, murmuring in low, guttural tones that curled like smoke. Hermione watched from just behind him, arms crossed, breath shallow. She had read about this spell, Animus Testimonium, the soul's testimony, but never seen it performed. It was forbidden in most modern circles, too close to necromancy, too reliant on the lingering echoes of the dead. But Viktor had insisted it was their only way forward. "It will show us what the wand remembers," he had said earlier, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "Not what men wrote in books, not what legends pretend, but what it felt." Now, as he sprinkled a final pinch of powdered hawthorn into the bowl, the mixture began to glow, a soft, pulsing blue like embers breathing back to life. He stepped back, hands open at his sides, and nodded to her. "Close your eyes," he said, "and think only of the wand, its weight, its power, its hunger." Hermione obeyed. She thought of the broken shard they had recovered from the Albanian forest. Pale elder wood, fractured at the tip, humming faintly when near other wands. She thought of the strange storms over Prague, the uncontrolled bursts of magic that shattered windows and bent iron, all radiating from no known source. And she thought of the dream she'd had 3 nights ago, standing in a ruined hall, holding something long and terrible, while voices whispered in languages she didn't know. A sudden cold washed over her, not of the body but of the mind. Her knees buckled. Viktor caught her arm steady and strong. "Do not fight it," he whispered. "Let it pull you." And then she was no longer in the study. She stood in a moonlit grove, the trees silver-barked and tall, their roots knotted like old hands. Before her, a man in dark robes raised the elder wand, whole, unbroken, blazing with light. He spoke no words, but the air cracked with power. She felt it in her bones, a surge so vast it threatened to tear her apart. Then collapse, a gasp, blood on the grass. The wand slipped from his fingers, and a woman with braided hair and a face like winter stooped to take it. Another shift, snow, a battlefield. A warrior with frost in his beard wielded the wand like a sword, cutting through curses with brutal precision. But he was afraid. She could feel it, a trembling beneath the bravado. A spell struck him in the chest. He fell. The wand rolled into the snow, untouched, waiting. Again, a dim room, lit by candlelight. A young man, barely older than she had been at Hogwarts, held the wand with reverence, tracing its length with trembling fingers. He whispered a name, Antioch, and then, softer, "Forgive me." The wand pulsed once, warmly, almost lovingly. Then the door burst open. Shouts, a flash of green light. The boy dropped. The wand clattered to the floor. Hermione gasped, snapping back to the present. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Tears streamed down her face, though she did not know why. Viktor was watching her, his dark eyes full of something unreadable. Grief, perhaps, or recognition. "You saw them," he said. She nodded, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. Not just owners. They were connected to it. Some feared it. Some loved it. One wept when he held it. He exhaled slowly, because it was never just a tool. It remembers every hand, every heart. She looked at him, really looked. the lines around his eyes, the quiet sorrow in his stance. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" He did not answer at once. Then softly, "My grandfather, he tried this spell. Long ago. He said the wand does not choose. It answers to blood, to grief, to longing. And what is it answering to now?" The candle flames dipped. The bowl's glow faded to ash. Viktor met her gaze. "That, we must find out." Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the window panes of Viktor Krum's ancestral library, a low, hypnotic drumming that mingled with the crackle of the hearth. Dust-scented air clung to the silence between them, thick with centuries of unread tomes and unspoken words. Hermione stood before a stone pedestal, her fingers hovering just above a shard of obsidian black wood no longer than her palm. It pulsed faintly, like a heart buried beneath ash. "This is not just a piece of wood," Viktor said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "It remembers." Hermione glanced at him. He stood near the doorway, shoulders broad beneath a worn wool coat, his face sharper with age, but his eyes unchanged. Dark, watchful, holding depths she'd once thought she understood. "It's responding to something," she murmured. "Not to me, to time." She touched the shard. The room dissolved. Cold wind tore through her. Snowflakes stung her cheeks as she stood. No, floated, above a battlefield frozen in a moment of chaos. Then in cloaks of silver thread and charred leather faced each other, wands raised, mouths open in silent incantations. Sparks hung mid-air like stars, caught in amber. A bolt of violet light stopped inches from a man's chest. Another duel raged behind them, a woman with wild hair hurling fire that curled, unmoving, around her opponent's shield. And in the center, standing atop a mound of shattered stone, a figure raised a wand of pale, seamless wood. He held her wand. It shone with a cold, hungry light. Hermione gasped, but no sound came. She tried to move, but her body was not her own. She was a ghost within the memory, tethered to the shard's pulse. Then the vision shifted. A forest clearing. Two brothers, resemblances too close to be coincidence, circling each other with wands drawn. One whispered, "I do not wish to fight," but his fingers tightened on his wand. The other answered, "The wand chooses, not the brother," and struck. The spell never landed. It hovered between them, a coil of silver fire, eternally incomplete. Another scene, a castle courtyard, rain-slicked stones. A young man, barely older than Harry had been at 17, screamed a curse that never left his lips. His wand trembled, pointing at an older wizard whose eyes were full of pity. The magic strained, caught in some unseen web. Again and again the duels unfolded, dozens, hundreds, each one arrested at the moment of impact. No victor, no resolution. Just magic suspended, grief unspent, words unspoken. And through it all, the elder wand appeared, sometimes held, sometimes merely present, its influence a thread weaving through every unfinished confrontation. Hermione felt something deeper than sight. She heard the echoes, breath caught in throats, the click of teeth grinding, the softest whimper of regret. She smelled blood that had never spilled, earth that had never been turned by graves. Then suddenly she was back. She stumbled, her knees buckling. Viktor caught her arm before she fell, his grip firm, warm. "You saw them," he said, not a question. She nodded, breathless. "All those duels, they never ended. The magic, it's still waiting. For what? For closure," he said quietly. "Or for completion." She looked at the shard. Its pulse had slowed. "The elder wand isn't calling to be claimed," she whispered. "It's calling to be heard. These duels, they're bound to it." Every time it changed hands through violence, it carried the echo of what was left unresolved. Viktor moved to the hearth, stoking the flames with a brass poker. "In Bulgarian lore we say some magic does not die. It sleeps in bones, in stones, in the air before a storm. Its wand, it is not just power, it is memory, and memory demands witness." Hermione wrapped her arms around herself. "Then we're not looking for a way to control it. We're looking for a way to let it go." Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the old stones clean. And deep within the shard, something stirred, not with hunger, but with the quiet ache of stories never finished. The air beneath Vienna was thick, with the scent of old parchment and damp stone, a weight that pressed against the chest like centuries of silence given form. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the lantern in her hand casting long, trembling shadows across the arched corridor. The steps behind them had long since faded. No one followed, not officially, not since the Ministry had dismissed her concerns as residual magical echoes. But Viktor had listened. He stood beside her now, boots scuffing softly against the worn flagstones, his breath, a faint plume in a chill. "This way," he murmured, voice low, as if the walls themselves might report their presence. His Bulgarian accent curled around the words like smoke. "The bloodline vaults are not marked on any register. Only those of the old keys may enter." Hermione glanced at the brass key in his palm, etched with runes that shivered faintly in the dim light. "You never told me you had a key." He offered a small shrug. "My grandfather was archivist here, before the war, before he disappeared." His voice dipped, just slightly, on the last word. "He left things, instructions, warnings." She studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the scar above his brow from a cursed blade during the Triwizard Tournament. Time had softened nothing about him, only deepened the quiet intensity she remembered. "You think the Elder Wand's power is tied to bloodlines?" she said, more statement than question. "Yes," he replied. "Not just ownership, not just conquest. Blood remembers, magic remembers. When the wand changes hands through violence, through death, something is left behind. A trace, a call." They reached a heavy oak door banded with iron. Viktor inserted the key. The mechanism turned with a series of soft clicks, like bones, settling into place. The door groaned open, revealing a chamber lined with towering shelves, each stacked with leather-bound tomes, and scrolls sealed with wax, the color of dried blood. Hermione stepped in first, raising the lantern. Dust swirled in the light like sleeping spirits. "These are lineage records," she breathed, running a finger along a spine embossed with a sigil she didn't recognize. "Not just pure-blood families. These are wand-bearer dynasties." "Exactly," Viktor said, moving to a shelf, marked with a spiral glyph. "The Elder Wand has passed through many hands, but few have studied those who came after. The children, the cousins, the ones who inherited not the wand, but the magic in their veins." She turned sharply. "You think the surges across Europe, those uncontrolled bursts of raw power, they're not accidents, they're awakenings?" He met her gaze. "Yes, and if they are not understood, not guided, they will tear themselves apart, or worse, someone will find a way to gather them, to make the wand whole again." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Then we're not just searching for answers, we're racing against time." They worked in silence for hours, pulling volumes from the shelves, whispering incantations to unseal them, tracing names and dates with ink-stained fingers. Hermione found a record from 1743, Ladislas Morgenstern, a duel in Prague, death by a snapped wand. His daughter, Eliska, later accused of spontaneous combustion during a thunderstorm. Viktor uncovered a Hungarian line, Zoltán Varga, whose grandson in 1891 had summoned a storm that blackened the sky over Lake Balaton without ever touching his wand. "They weren't anomalies," Hermione whispered, flipping a brittle page. "They were inheritors. The wand's magic didn't die with the bearer. It lingered, in their blood." Viktor nodded slowly. "And now, something is waking it, calling it." She looked up. "But what? Or who?" Before he could answer, the lantern flickered. The air grew heavier. From deep within the archive, a low hum began. Not a sound, but a vibration, felt in the teeth, in the marrow. The oldest scroll on the table trembled, then unfurled on its own. In faded crimson ink, a single phrase emerged, as if freshly written. "The first shall stir." Rain tapped a slow rhythm against the glass panes of the workshop, each drop fracturing the dim glow of blue witchlight that hovered above the cluttered workbench. The air smelled of tarnished silver, dried dragon bile, and something older, ozone, and scorched oak, the residue of spells long spent. Hermione stepped carefully over coiled wires and open grimoires, her boots crunching faintly on a scatter of broken crystal. Viktor followed in silence, his broad frame nearly brushing both walls of the narrow stairway that led down into the cellar forge. The woman waiting for them stood with her back turned, sleeves rolled to the elbow, chiseling symbols into a length of pale U. She didn't look up as they entered. "You're late," she said, voice low and edged with an accent that wound between Bulgarian and something older, stranger. "We were delayed at the border," Hermione replied, pulling off her gloves. "The ward's near the Carpathians. They've grown unstable." Sparks flared without cause. The flock of birds turned to ash mid-flight. The woman set down her chisel. "Then you've seen the beginning." She turned then, and Hermione caught her breath. Her face was lined, but her eyes, sharp amber, too knowing, held the clarity of someone who had spent too long staring into fire. A thin scar ran from temple to jaw, the kind not made by blade or curse, but by recoil. A one-maker's mark. "I am Anya," she said, "daughter of Borin the Wandrite. My father forged wands for those who remembered the wand of death, not by name, but by hunger, by fear." Viktor bowed his head slightly. "We did not know his line survived." "Not many do," Anna said. "After the war, the ministry burned his records, called them dangerous, heretical." She gave a dry, mirthless laugh. "They feared the truth more than the magic." Hermione stepped closer, eyes fixed on the U. "You're working with it, the wood." Anya's fingers brushed the grain, not just any. "This is a splinter. True splinter. From the original tree. The one struck by lightning on the night the first death stick was born. My father kept it sealed in lead and silence for 50 years. Only now, only with the tremors in the earth, has it begun to hum again." She reached beneath the table and pulled out a small box, iron-bound and etched with runes that pulsed faintly. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a twisted shard of wood, dark as charcoal, but threaded through with veins of silver light. It throbbed, barely, like a sleeping heart. Hermione felt it before she saw it, the pull in her chest, the whisper at the edge of hearing. Power. Not hers. Not meant for her. But aware. "This is no mere fragment," Viktor murmured. It remembers everything," Andrew corrected. "Every hand that held the wand, every death it caused, every soul it tempted." She closed the box with a snap. "And it is waking up." Hermione swallowed. "We need to know how the Elder Wand was built. Not just the wooden core, but the rites, the bindings. If there's a way to break it," Anya studied her, "or finish it." "That depends," Hermione said carefully, "on what it wants." Anya turned and walked to a shelf crusted with dust and dried herbs. She pulled down a scroll, its edges blackened, tied with a strip of human hair. "My father believed the wand was never meant to be owned, only carried, like a storm carried by the wind. He left this, his final work, a lineage map, not of blood but of resonance. It shows every wand made from splinters of the original, every soul whose magic touched it, however briefly." She laid the scroll on the table. Viktor unrolled it with cautious hands. Symbols flared to life, names, dates, locations, illuminated in shifting ink that seemed to breathe. At the center, a branching tree of light pulsed outward, connecting ancient names: Antioch Peveril, Gregorovitch, Grindelwald, to others less known. And then, near the edge, a new spark flickered. "Unnamed, unclaimed." "It's not finished," Viktor said. "No," Anya agreed. "It's searching." Hermione stared at the glowing point. "For a final bearer, or a grave?" Anya said softly. "The wand does not crave power, I think. It craves rest. But it cannot sleep until the last debt is paid." A silence settled over the room, thick with implication. Outside the rain fell harder. The blue witchlight trembled, and deep within the iron box, the splinter pulsed once, soft, insistent, like a call or a warning. The air in the Carpathian village was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, twilight settling like a bruise over the jagged peaks. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the wool damp from the day's drizzle, her boots sinking slightly into the mud as she stepped from the crooked cottage. Viktor stood a few paces ahead, his silhouette broad against the fading light, one hand resting on the hilt of the old Bulgarian ceremonial blade he still wore out of habit. "It matches the inscription," she said, catching up. "The sigil on the stone, 3 interlocking spirals, is the same as the one in the Delacour archives. This was no accident, Viktor. Someone buried that fragment here deliberately." He turned, face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "And someone dug it up before we got here." His voice was low, roughened by years and cold winds. "The hole was fresh, soil too light. Someone beat us by hours." Hermione exhaled sharply, breath misting in the chill. That's impossible. Only 3 people knew we were coming. Me, you, and Kingsley. And I didn't even tell him the exact location. Viktor's dark eyes scanned the tree line, narrow and alert. Then someone is watching, following. A gust of wind rattled the thatch above, and from the corner of her vision, Hermione thought she saw movement, a flicker of cloth between the firs. She turned, wand already in hand, but saw nothing. Just the darkening trees, their branches clawing at the sky. "We should go," she said. "Now." They moved quickly down the narrow path, boots crunching on frost-laced gravel. Viktor kept to the outer edge, scanning the shadows, his own wand concealed beneath his coat. Hermione's pulse thronged in her throat. This wasn't just about fragments anymore. This was pursuit. They apparated to a safe house near the Danube, a crumbling stone villa hidden beneath layers of muggle-repelling charms. The moment they landed in the overgrown courtyard, Viktor raised a hand. "Silence," he pointed. The front door hung ajar. Hermione's breath caught. The wards were intact, shimmering faintly in the air like heat haze, but someone had known the countersign. Only another wizard with deep knowledge of ancient wards could have bypassed them without breaking them. They entered with wands raised. The interior was undisturbed. Dust undisturbed on the shelves, books untouched. But on the table in the center of the sitting room, something gleamed. A vial, clear glass, stoppered with wax stamped with a sigil, a serpent coiled around a broken wand. Hermione stepped forward, heart hammering. "That's not ours." "No," Viktor said softly, "but it was left for us." Inside the vial, suspended in silvery liquid, was a sliver of wood, pale, almost luminous. A fragment of the Elder Wand, and beneath it, a note in elegant curling script. "You seek what you do not understand. The wand remembers its masters. It does not forgive thieves." Hermione's fingers hovered over the parchment. "This isn't just a warning, it's a challenge." Viktor took her wrist gently, pulling her back. "Do not touch it. The ink may be spelled." She turned to him, voice low. "Who would know about the fragments? About us?" "There are collectors," he said. "Men who hoard power like dragons hoard gold. One name comes to mind. Dimitrov. Silas Dimitrov. Obsessed with Deathly Hollows. Disgraced scholar. Banished from the Durmstrang archives 10 years ago for attempting to reconstruct a wand, using stolen relics. And you think he's following us?" "I think," Viktor said, eyes grim. "He has been for weeks. The misdirection in the Prague records. The false lead in Transylvania. Someone wanted us chasing shadows." Hermione stared at the vial. The fragment inside pulsed faintly, as if breathing. "He's not just after the pieces," she whispered. "He wants to awaken it." Viktor nodded. "And if he does, the wand will not choose him. It will consume him. Or worse, it will listen." Outside, the wind rose again, and somewhere in the dark, beyond the river, a raven called once, sharp and clear. A signal or a warning? Rain lashed the cobblestones of Malastrana, slicking the ancient stones until they gleamed like wet bone beneath the bruised frog sky. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the weight of the storm matching the tension coiled in her chest. Behind her, Viktor moved with the quiet precision of a man used to shadows, his breath a pale wisp in the cold. The cathedral loomed ahead, its spires clawing at the clouds, its arched windows dark and watchful. No cross hung above the door, only a sigil carved in blackened oak, 3 spirals bound by a broken line. Wandmaker's mark. Blood ward. "This is it," Hermione said, voice low. "The trace led here. I felt it, like static in my teeth." Viktor nodded, fingers brushing the hilt of the ritual dagger at his belt. "He knows we are coming. The wards sing when stepped upon, like iron humming." She glanced at him. His face was harder than she remembered from Hogwarts, etched by wind and war, eyes like flint beneath thick brows. But the steadiness remained, the quiet. They stepped across the threshold. The air inside was thick, stale with the scent of old parchment, burnt sage, and something sharper, ozone maybe, with a tang of unraveled magic. Rows of glass cases lined the nave, each lit by a single flickering candle. Inside, shattered wands, knotted lengths of yew and hawthorn, inlaid with silver runes, fingers preserved in amber, a mask of blackened antler that seemed to breathe when not looked at directly. Hermione's pulse quickened. These aren't just relics, they're anchors, each one tied to a death, a surrender. And he collects them, Viktor murmured, not for study, for hunger. At the altar, a figure stood silhouetted against a stained glass window, depicting a duel beneath a dying star. Tall, draped in robes, the color of dried blood, his hands resting on a lectern, carved from a single piece of elder wood. "Granger," the man said without turning. His voice was smooth, but layered, like stones beneath a river. "I wondered if your calculations would bring you so far, if it was something older." "Mericlalash," Hermione said, stepping forward. "You've been siphoning residual magic from the Elder Wand's lineage. These fragments, they're not yours to bind." He turned slowly. His face was ageless, eyes too bright, too reflective. "Yours either. The wand chooses, they say, but choice is a lie. Power accumulates. It calls to its kin, and I am merely the listener." Viktor moved to flank him, silent as snowfall. "You pulled a shard from the Danube last winter. A boy drowned retrieving it. Was that listening?" Thalish smiled. "Thin, cold. Sacrifice feeds continuity. The wand's power is scattered, yes, but not lost. I gather what was abandoned, what was feared, what was wasted." Hermione reached into her robes, but her wand trembled in her hand. The air thickened. The candles flared blue. "You don't understand what you're holding," she said. "The Elder Wand doesn't belong to any one master. It survives by breaking bonds, by betrayal, by death. You're not restoring it. You're feeding its curse." "And what would you do?" Thalish asked, stepping down from the dais. "Bury it again, pretend the bloodline ends with you? I have traced 12 descendants of Antioch Peveril. One breathes Indiana, as we speak, and their blood sings when near these fragments." Viktor's hand closed around a locket at his throat, one Hermione hadn't seen before. Silver, etched with a Bulgarian crest. "My grandmother was a keeper of the old wards. She told me of the first wand, not as power, but as warning. It was never meant to be whole." Thalish laughed then, a sound like cracking ice. "And yet, here you both stand. The scholar and the seeker, one who fears power, one who once loved it enough to duel a dragon for it." Hermione flinched. Viktor did not. "The wand is awake," Thalish whispered, "and it remembers every hand that held it, every heart that broke beneath it. It is calling its pieces home. Will you answer as guardians or as thieves?" The candles snuffed out. Darkness swallowed the cathedral, and from the relics a low, resonant hum began, like 1,000 voices whispering in unison, in a language older than spells. Hermione gripped her wand. Viktor stepped closer to her side. "We're not here to take," she said into the dark. "We're here to end it." Silence. Then, from the back of the nave, a single shard of elder wood rose from its case, floating, glowing, pulsing like a star caught in glass. It was listening. Rain lashed against the cracked stone of the abandoned chapel in the Carpathians, its skeletal roof open to the bruised sky. Inside, the air hummed with a low, discordant energy, like a violin string pulled too tight. Hermione stood at the altar, her fingers hovering over the shard, no larger than a sliver of obsidian, yet pulsing with a rhythm that made her teeth ache. It was embedded in the ancient wood, glowing faintly violet veins of light pulsing outward like roots. "It is not just a piece," Viktor said from behind her, his voice low, strained. "It remembers. It hungers." She turned slightly, catching the shadow in his eyes. The journey here had been long, through forgotten cemeteries, abandoned monasteries, and the whispered warnings of old wizards, who still feared speaking the wand's name. It followed the trail of disturbances. A village in Bulgaria where time looped for 3 hours every dawn, a forest in Transylvania where trees grew backward, their bark peeling into runes. Each anomaly traced back to a fragment of the Elder Wand, buried or hidden for centuries. And now, this one. "It's reacting to us," Hermione murmured, her breath flaunting in the cold, "like it knows we're here to stop it." Viktor stepped forward, his heavy coat dripping onto the flagstones. He held a leather-bound tome, Antonin Dolohov's private grimoire, recovered from a collapsed cellar in Varna. "There is a way," he said, but not without cost. She looked at him. What kind of cost? To destroy a piece of the Elder Wand, you must offer something of equal weight. Not gold, not magic, but memory, choice, pain. He hesitated. Something true. She exhaled sharply. That's not precise. No. The magic like this does not bargain in clarity. Outside, thunder rolled, and the shard flared, once, twice, sending a ripple through the air. The candles along the altar ignited without flame, their wicks smoking blue. Hermione felt it then, a pull behind her eyes, like something was trying to pry loose a memory from her mind. "Someone's nearby," she whispered. Viktor turned, wand drawn. The chapel door groaned open, and a figure stepped through, hooded, limping. A woman, face gaunt, eyes wide with desperation. "You don't understand what you're doing," she rasped. "That fragment, it's all that's left of my son." Hermione's breath caught. "Your son?" "He was a wand maker," the woman said, voice cracking. "Apprentice to the last keeper. When the ministry came, they killed him. But he hid this piece. Said it wasn't meant to be forgotten, that it could be saved." Viktor's jaw tightened. "And you wish to keep it?" "I wish to finish his work," she said. To restore what was broken. Hermione looked back at the shard. It pulsed again, softer now almost, pleading. But she remembered the stories. Antioch Peveril's blood, Grindelwald's fire, Dumbledore's silence. The wand had never brought peace, only power, only ruin. "We can't restore it," she said gently. "Not without risking everything." The woman's eyes burned. "Then you are no better than those who killed him." Before Hermione could respond, the shard erupted. Light, white and searing, exploded from the altar. The ground trembled. Viktor shouted, pulling Hermione back as the air walked, twisting time in jagged pulses. For a heartbeat she saw herself at 14, crying in the bathroom after Draco's cruel words. Then 17, wand raised against Bellatrix. Then 23, standing alone at a grave with no name. Memories ripped from her like threads. Viktor staggered, clutching his chest. "It takes what you love most." She understood then. The price wasn't symbolic. It was literal. With a cry, she raised her wand, not to attack, but to surrender. "I give it freely," she shouted into the storm. "My memory of the first time I cast a spell. Take it." The shard hesitated. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, it split. The light collapsed inward. The woman screamed. The chapel fell silent. Hermione swayed, her mind suddenly hollow. She couldn't remember the feel of her first spell, the joy, the wonder. Only the shape of the words remained, empty. Viktor caught her before she fell. Outside, the rain slowed. A single star pierced the clouds. "It is done," he said, voice raw. She nodded, tears cutting through the grime on her face. "And it will happen again." "Yes," he whispered, "but not tonight." Rain tapped a slow rhythm against the leaded windows of Viktor's ancestral study, the kind of steady drizzle that blurred the edges of the Bulgarian mountains into mist and memory. Hermione stood by the hearth, her fingers tracing the spine of a crumbling grimoire bound in dragonhide. The air smelled of damp parchment and old oak, of spells whispered in forgotten dialects. For 3 days they'd pored over texts older than Hogwarts, chasing the ghost of a signature written not in ink, but in magic. "It's not just the wand," she said, more to herself than to Viktor. "It's the way the magic echoes, like it's incomplete." Viktor looked up from the table, his dark eyes shadowed beneath heavy brows. A sliver of obsidian glass lay before him, one of the recovered fragments they'd traced from a cursed spring in Transylvania. It shimmered faintly when touched, pulsing with a rhythm that matched no known wand core. "Da," he murmured. Like a song with one note missing, he reached out, gloved fingers brushing the surface. A low hum filled the room, and for a moment the firelight bent toward the glass, as if drawn by something unseen. Hermione stepped back, pulse quickening. She'd felt it too, the pull, the hunger. "I've been thinking about the hollows," she said. "The wand, the stone, the cloak. We've always believed they were the three. But what if What if they were never meant to be the only ones? Viktor studied her. You believe there is a fourth? I believe the magic doesn't lie. Every fragment we've found, each one resonates with the Elder Wand's energy, but twisted, like it's tried to reach something else. Something older. She opened the grimoire, turning to a page marked with a ribbon of braided silver thread. The script was in an archaic Macedonian hand, nearly illegible, but she'd spent the night translating it. He of holds the wand without the seal shall command only shadow. The blood must speak, and the hollow must answer, or the power will consume the hand that wields it. Viktor exhaled slowly. The hollow. Yes, and the seal. I didn't understand it at first. But look, this symbol appears in all the fragments. She pointed to a glyph etched into the margin, 3 interlocking arcs beneath a single eye. It's not in any of the Hallow's lore, but it's here, repeated. Like a signature. He rose, crossing to a chest carved from black walnut. From within, he withdrew a small tarnished medallion, bronze with the same symbol pressed into its surface. Hermione's breath caught. Where did you get that? My grandfather. He said it was not a talisman but a witness, that it had been passed down with one rule: never let it touch a wand of elder wood. She reached out, then hesitated. May I? He nodded. Her fingers closed around the medallion. Cold shot up her arm, not the bite of metal, but the deep chill of absence. A hollow. And then, faintly, a voice, not in her ears but in her bones. Not master, keeper. She dropped it. Viktor caught it before it hit the floor. His expression was unreadable. You heard it. Yes, but it wasn't in English, or any language I know, and yet I understood. That is the hollow, he said quietly. It does not speak to the mind. It speaks to the blood. She looked at him. You think it's tied to lineage, not just to death, but to those who served or resisted. He turned the medallion over. My family was not one of the original 3, but we were near them. Watchers, protectors. Maybe we were meant to guard the balance, not the power. The lack of it. Outside, the rain ceased. Silence pressed in. Hermione picked up the medallion again. This time, the cold was gentler. The voice did not return, but the symbol glowed faintly, like breath on glass. The Elder Wand isn't calling to be restored, she whispered. It's calling for the hollow to answer. To finish what was begun. And if it does? Viktor asked. She met his gaze. Then we'll have to decide whether some things should remain broken. The water was black as ink, and twice as deep, swallowing the last remnants of twilight whole. Hermione stood at the shore, her fingers clenched around the frayed edge of an old Durmstrang map, its ink smudged by time and sea spray. The wind tugged at her coat, whispering through the reeds like voices long buried. Behind her, Viktor adjusted the straps of the enchanted breathing apparatus, his breath visible in short, steady puffs. You're certain this is the place? He asked, his voice low, the Bulgarian lilt softer now with age. She nodded. The third anomaly pulse came from here, and the symbol on the fragment, it matches the sigil on Karkaroff's private ledger. He wasn't just hiding dark objects, he was protecting something older than him. Viktor studied the lake's surface, still and lifeless under the moonless sky. No merfolk had been seen near the center for years, not since the war. That's not coincidence, she murmured. Something beneath is repelling them. They fastened their charms, gillyweed laid with a modified bubblehead infusion, a trick Viktor learned from a diver in the Black Sea who spoke to krakens in his sleep. The magic tingled at Hermione's temples as they stepped into the water. Cold seized her legs at once, sharp and biting, but the spell took hold, wrapping her in a silken film of breathable air. She submerged. The world below was a cathedral of silence and shadow. Sunken trees, atrophied by time and spellwork, rose like broken pillars from the silt. Schools of silver fish darted between them, their eyes reflecting what little light filtered down. Deeper they swam, past the remains of a shattered carriage, perhaps from a triwizard task long forgotten. And then, just as the pressure began to build in her ears, she saw it. A stone archway, half buried in the lake bed, carved with runes that pulsed faintly blue. Viktor paused beside her, reaching out to trace the symbols. His lips moved silently, reading in Old High Bulgarian, a dialect taught only in the deepest archives of Durmstrang. "It speaks of binding," he whispered through the charm. "By bone and blood the splintered one sleeps. He who bears the mark of the antlered stag shall wake it." Hermione frowned. The antlered stag. That's not Harry's Patronus. Not any more. "No," Viktor said, eyes narrowing. "But it was once." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the water. She remembered Harry, 17, trembling after casting his first corporeal Patronus. The great silver stag that galloped through the forest near Hogsmeade. Could the wand, its essence, have encoded that memory? Or was it calling to something older, something primal in the magic of those who once wielded it? They pushed forward. The arch opened into a tunnel, its walls lined with iron brackets holding aloft ghostly flames, ever-burners, still alight after centuries. At the end stood a door, circular and seamless, made of a metal that looked like fused meteorite. In its center was a depression, shaped like a wand, long, slender, with a spiral groove down its length. Hermione reached into her cloak and pulled out the shard they'd recovered from the ruins of a monastery in the Carpathians. It was no longer than her thumb, carved from alder wood, so pale it seemed translucent. When she placed it into the depression, the metal hummed. The door split open in 4 directions, folding into the walls, like blooming petals. Beyond lay a chamber filled with relics, not of war, but of memory. Shelves lined with vials of preserved hair, bones wrapped in silk, wands broken and bound with silver thread. At the center, suspended in a sphere of enchanted water, floated a single, jagged fragment of what could only be the Elder Wand. Viktor stepped forward, awe in his voice. Not destruction, preservation. They weren't hiding it, Hermione realized. They were keeping it safe, waiting. For whom? She looked at him, the blue light casting shadows across his strong features. Maybe for us. A low vibration began in the chamber, the water trembling. The fragment in the sphere turned slowly, aligning itself, pointing not at her, not at Viktor, but at the surface, toward the castle. And then, from deep within the earth, something answered. The air in the Black Sea cavern tasted of salt and stone, thick with the breath of centuries. Hermione's wand trembled in her hand, its tip casting a narrow beam that cut through the damp dark like a blade. Each step forward sent ripples through the shallow water beneath them, and with each ripple the walls seemed to sigh. Viktor walked slightly ahead, his silhouette broad and steady against the narrowing passage. He paused, one hand pressed against the moss-slick rock, his voice low. "It's here. I can feel it. The magic is not sleeping. It's waiting." Hermione swallowed, her throat tight. Waiting for what? He didn't answer. Instead, he muttered something in Bulgarian, a phrase she didn't recognize, but whose cadence felt ancient, like the turning of stones at a forgotten tide. As the last syllable left his lips, the water at their feet shivered, not from their movement, but from within. A soft blue light blued beneath the surface, spreading in widening rings that pulsed like a heartbeat. The walls answered, glyphs flaring to life along the stone, spirals, sigils, names carved in a script older than Hogwarts. "This is not Bulgarian," Hermione whispered, crouching to trace one of the symbols with a gloved finger. "It's older, Proto-Slavic maybe. No, earlier. This might be Thracian." Viktor nodded. "My grandfather spoke of this place, not in stories, in warnings. He said the sea guards what the land forgot, and that some doors open only when 2 names are spoken, one of blood, one of mind." She looked up at him. "You never mentioned that before." He met her gaze, his dark eyes unreadable. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to remember." A silence settled between them, heavier than the water, deeper than the dark. Then, without prompting, Viktor spoke again, this time 2 names, one guttural and old, the other soft, almost tender. The water erupted in white. The floor trembled. Before them the rocks split like a wound, revealing a vault sealed behind a lattice of silver and bone. The lattice pulsed, not with magic as she knew it, not with incantations or spells, but with memory. Hermione stepped forward, her breath catching. "It's not enchanted to keep people out," she murmured. "It's enchanted to remember." Viktor's hand brushed hers, brief and warm. Then we must be worthy of remembrance. Together they reached out. The lattice parted without resistance, folding back like the petals of some vast sleeping flower. Inside, the chamber was dry, impossibly so, and lined with shelves of black wood that seemed to drink the light. On each shelf lay shards of wood and crystal, bound in silver wire, each fragment glowing faintly. Some pulsed red like embers, others flickered silver like starlight on ice. The elder wand, Hermione breathed. Not one, not whole. But pieces, so many pieces. Viktor moved to the center shelf, where a single vial rested, filled with dark liquid that swirled, as if stirred by unseen currents. Not just wood, he said. Blood. The bearer's blood. Mixed with the wand's core. This is how it remembers. She stepped closer, her reflection wavering in the glass. But why here? Why hidden in the sea? Because the water remembers everything, Viktor said softly. What is lost? What is broken? What was never meant to be held? Outside, the sea groaned against the cavern mouth, and deep within the vault, the fragments began to hum, a low, sorrowful tone like a lullaby sung in a language no living soul could name. Hermione closed her eyes. For a moment she didn't see the vault, the sea, or Viktor beside her. She saw Dumbledore's hand, pale and burned, Snape's grief, silent and deep, Harry standing in the forest, choosing to die, and she understood. This was not about power, it was about release. Rain slicked the cobblestones of an abandoned village in the Rhodope Mountains, its silence broken only by the low groan of wind through shattered windows. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the fabric damp and heavy, her breath curling in pale wisps before her. Viktor moved ahead, his boots steady on the uneven ground, his hand resting on the hilt of a curved dagger at his belt, not for blades, but for the weight it gave him, a reminder of what was real. They had followed the trail of fractured magic here, a pattern of spells gone awry, whispers of fire from cold hearths, doors opening to rooms that no longer existed. Every sign pointed to the Elder Wand's echo, not the wand itself, but something older, its memory, perhaps, or its hunger. This place, Viktor said, voice low, was never on maps, not even Bulgarian ones. It wasn't meant to be found, Hermione replied. Not until now. They reached a stone archway, half collapsed, its keystone carved with a spiral that pulsed faintly under the moonlight. She reached out, fingers brushing the cold surface, and the moment she made contact, the world tilted. A figure emerged from the mist, not solid, not quite ghost, but something in between. Tall, robed in tattered white, eyes like smoldering coals. It spoke, but the voice came not from the air, but from within their bones. You seek the end of the wand, but you misunderstand its beginning. Hermione stepped back, heart-hammering. Who are you? I am the last of the keepers, the ones who buried the truth beneath stone and silence. The wand was not forged for conquest. It was a vessel, a bridge between this world and the unseen. But men took it, shaped it, broke it with their pride. Viktor knelt, not in submission, but in respect. We mean no harm. We only wish to stop the magic from unraveling. The spirit's gaze shifted to him. You carry the blood of one who once tried to return it to the earth. Your grandfather, Creston, sealed a fragment beneath Durmstrang's lake. He knew, as I know, that the wand was never meant to end with men. Hermione's breath caught. Then, who was it meant for? The figure raised a translucent hand. Behind it, the ruins shimmered, and suddenly they were not in a village, but in a grove. Ancient trees with silver bark, women in dark robes moving in slow circles, their wands not held like weapons, but like offerings. The air hummed with a chant in a language older than Latin. The wand was born of a pact, not of dominion, but of balance. 3 trees, 3 women, 3 drops of blood. It was never meant to be owned, only guarded, only passed. But when the last keeper died, murdered by those who called her a witch, the pact was broken, and the wand awoke in anger. The Deathly Hallows, Hermione whispered. They weren't just legends, they were safeguards. The wand, the stone, the cloak, they were meant to be held apart to keep the balance. And now, the spirit said, they are calling to be whole again, but not for a master, for a guardian. Viktor looked to Hermione. You feel it, don't you? The pull. She did. It had started weeks ago, dreams of fire without heat. A voice murmuring in a language she'd never learned. Spells forming on her tongue before she knew she'd cast them. The wand in her pocket, her own, the one she'd earned, had begun to tremble at odd hours, as if answering a distant call. The power stirs because it remembers, the spirit said, and it remembers her. Hermione's pulse quickened. Her, the one who will not claim it, the one who will let it sleep. The wand does not seek a conqueror. It seeks a woman who will close her hand and let go. The vision faded. The grove vanished. They were back in the rain, the archway crumbling behind them, the spirit gone. But the silence now felt different, watchful. Viktor stood slowly. You know what this means. Hermione looked down at her hand, still tingling from the vision. It means the real danger isn't in restoring the wand, it's in who might try to wield it. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, something ancient cracked open, just a little. Laying tapped steadily against the leaden windows of Viktor's ancestral library, a steady rhythm that matched the slow turn of pages beneath Hermione's fingers. Dust motes swirled in the dim light of a single enchanted lamp, its glow resisting the creeping shadows. She exhaled, her breath making a small cloud in the chill air. It doesn't make sense, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Every account we've found speaks of conquest, of force. The wand chooses the strongest, the most powerful. But what if that's wrong? Viktor looked up from the open tome before him, his dark eyes thoughtful. A scar ran faintly along his jaw, a relic from the war, like so many they both carried. You are thinking again, he said, voice low, with that soft cadence that still made her pulse flicker oddly, but not just with logic. I can see it. She met his gaze. I'm thinking about Ollivander. He said the wand chooses the wizard, but he never said it chose the one who can break it. What if it chooses the one who can understand it? He closed the book gently, the ancient leather sign under his palm. You believe it is not power that binds the wand, but empathy. I'm beginning to, she said, standing and moving to the shelf where they'd placed the recovered fragments. Shards of yew and elder, wrapped in silk, pulsing faintly when touched. Look at its history. It passes through the hands of murderers, tyrants, men who sought it for glory, and each time it brings them ruin. Grindelwald, Voldemort, even Dumbledore, in his own way, carried a burden with it. She touched one of the fragments, and for a moment warmth bloomed beneath her fingertip. Not violent, not demanding, just recognition. Viktor rose and stepped beside her. And yet you touched it first without harm. When others tried, the magic lashed out. I didn't reach for it to wield it, she whispered. I reached to stop it. A silence settled between them, deeper than the quiet of the room. Outside, thunder rolled, distant and slow. The air hummed with the weight of something ancient. Listening, he studied her profile, the focused line of her brow, the way her fingers curled slightly, as if still feeling the echo of the wand's pulse. You once saved me, he said suddenly, not with magic, not with strength. You stood in front of me when the curse came. You chose to take the risk. You did not have to. Her breath caught. She hadn't thought of that night in years, the graveyard, the flicker of green light, the way she'd moved without thinking. That wasn't bravery. It was instinct. Is that not the same? He asked gently. The wand has known power. Yes, but it has also known isolation, fear. It has been hunted, never held. What if it does not want a master, but a guardian? Hermione turned to face him fully. Then everything we've been taught is backwards. The Elder Wand isn't won through defeat. It's given, not to the one who dominates, but to the one who listens. A faint light shimmered from the fragments, faint as candle flame, rising like breath. It curled around her hand, not burning, not forcing, just touching, like a question. She didn't pull away. I think, she said, voice barely above a whisper. It's been waiting for someone who wouldn't try to own it. Viktor nodded slowly. Then perhaps it has found her. And in that quiet, rain-laced room, with centuries of myth and bloodshed whispering in the walls, the wand, or what remained of it, did not rise in power. It stilled. And for the first time, it felt like peace. The wind howled over the cliffside, tearing at Hermione's cloak as she clutched the iron-bound chest to her chest. Rain fell in slanted sheets, stinging her face like needles, and the sea below roared as if in warning. Behind her, the ruins of the old Volsini Observatory stood skeletal against the bruised sky, its shattered arches framing the storm with a kind of broken reverence. Viktor stood a few paces away, his silhouette rigid, his jaw clenched beneath the shadow of his hood. He held the last fragment in his gloved hand, a jagged shard of elderwood, pulsing with a faint, erratic light, like a dying heartbeat. "We don't even know what it wants," Hermione shouted over the gale, her voice raw from hours of argument. "This isn't just power, Viktor. It's memory, history. If we destroy it, we erase centuries of understanding. And if we keep it, we invite centuries of blood." He shot back, turning to face her. His dark eyes burned with something deeper than anger. Fear, yes, but also grief. You've seen what it does, the madness, the hunger. It whispers to men who think they are strong enough to wield it, and one by one, they fall. She stepped forward, the wet stone slicked beneath her boots. "Then we guard it. We study it responsibly, not in the ministry's vaults, not in some politician's hands, but with care, with knowledge. Isn't that why you came back? To understand, not destroy." Viktor exhaled sharply, the breath clouding in the cold air. "I came back because I saw the signs in the earth, in the stars, the fragments. They are waking, not by chance. Something is calling them, something older than wandlore, older than death itself, and we do not have the wisdom to answer it." A crack of thunder split the sky, and the fragment in his hand flared, casting violet light across the rocks. Hermione flinched, but held her ground, her fingers tightened around the chest. Inside lay the other pieces, 7 in all, each wrapped in lead-lined cloth, each humming faintly, like sleeping serpents. "I won't let you bury this, Viktor. Not without proof that it's dangerous now. Not without trying to understand." He stepped toward her, slow, deliberate. "Hermione, I have seen what happens when men believe they can master what should never be mastered. My grandfather. Do you know why he vanished into the Rhodopees? He had one of these fragments. Just one. By the 3rd moon he spoke to shadows. By the 5th, he set fire to his village with a look. He was not evil. He was undone." She swallowed, her throat tight. "I'm sorry, truly. But that doesn't mean every soul who touches it is doomed." "No," he said softly. "But the risk is too great. This wand was never meant to be whole. It was a mistake. A weapon forged in grief and pride. And every hand that has held it has paid in sorrow." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind and the distant crash of waves. Hermione looked down at the chest, then out over the churning sea. The horizon was just beginning to lighten, pale streaks of silver bleeding through the storm. Dawn. A new day, and yet she felt caught between two ends of time, the past pulling at her feet like an undertow. "You're afraid," she said at last. Not accusing, simply knowing. He didn't deny it. "Yes, and not for myself. For you, for what this thing might make you become." She met his gaze, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. The weight of years, of glances across great hall tables, of letters written and never sent, of a quiet affection that had never burned loud, but had never gone out. "If I let you seal it," she whispered, "what then? Do we pretend none of this happened? That the magic we've seen, the connections we've traced, do they just vanish?" "No," he said. "We remember, and we protect, not by holding power, but by choosing not to." The first true light of morning broke over the cliffs, pale and steady. Hermione closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the chest, the pull of the fragments, and the deeper pull of the man standing before her, not as a rival, not as a stranger, but as someone who had loved knowledge once as fiercely as she had, and had learned to fear it. At last, she knelt on the wet stone and opened the chest. Viktor did not move. He only watched, his breath slow, his hands still clenched around the final shard, and when she reached for it, he did not resist. Rain lashed against the narrow windows of the old Frana monastery library, each gust of wind rattling the ancient iron casements like a persistent ghost. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed for centuries, shimmering faintly in the pale light of a single enchanted candle that refused to gutter. Hermione stood over a cracked stone table, her finger tracing a symbol etched into a brittle scroll, a looping sigil that pulsed faintly, as though breathing. "It's not just traces of magic, Viktor," she said, voice tight. "This symbol, it's a binding. Someone tried to fragment the wand's soul, not just its wooden core. They didn't destroy it. They imprisoned it." Viktor stood near the doorway, arms crossed, his silhouette dark against the stormlight outside. He'd removed his coat, revealing a scar that ran from his collarbone down beneath his shirt, a relic from a cursed blade during the war. He didn't look at her. Not yet. "And what would you have us do?" he asked, his accent heavier when he was angry. "Break the binding, release a power no one can control. You speak of understanding, but your hands tremble toward action, always." She turned sharply. "Someone is dying, Viktor. 3 wizards in as many weeks, magic torn from them like thread from cloth. Their wands shattered from the inside. This isn't coincidence. The fragments are calling to each other, and if we don't understand why, more will die. Or worse," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "The wand chooses its master, not the other way around. You of all people should know what happens when someone believes they can control the uncontrollable." Her breath caught. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, like he was still seeing the boy he'd been, standing in a graveyard, wand raised, power surging through him like a storm. She'd read the reports. No one knew the full truth, but she did. He'd held the Elder Wand, briefly, accidentally, after finding a shard embedded in the ruins of Durmstrang's lower vaults. He'd survived, but not unscarred. "I'm not trying to wield it," she said softer now. "I'm trying to stop it from consuming anyone else." "And what about you?" he asked, stepping forward. The candle flickered between them. "You think your mind can resist it? Your will? You've spent your life mastering rules, logic, books. Yes, I admire that. But this wand, it does not care for rules. It feeds on ambition, on longing." She flinched. "Is that what you think this is about? My ambition?" "I think," he said, voice low, "that when you found that first fragment in Prague, you didn't send for the ministry. You said for me, not Robards, not Shacklebolt. Me. Why?" The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming rain. "Because I trust you," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Or because you hoped I'd say yes, because I always have, haven't I? Even when it cost me. Even when you looked at me with that kindness in your eyes and called me brave, as if bravery were enough." "That's not fair," she said, voice rising. "You left. You went back to Bulgaria, to your training, to your silence. I waited. For what?" he snapped. "A letter? A declaration? While the world groaned and your name was in every paper, tied to him, to all of them. What was I supposed to be? The foreign champion who couldn't compete?" "You were never competing," she said, stepping closer. "You were different, real, and I—" She stopped, her fingers curled into her robes. The sigil on the scroll pulsed again, sharper this time, and a low hum vibrated through the stones beneath their feet. Viktor closed his eyes. "Do not say it now, not when the wand is listening, not when every word between us could be twisted by something that feeds on desire." Hermione looked down at the scroll. The symbol glowed crimson, and she realized, horror dawning, that it hadn't reacted to the magic. It had reacted to them. Rain lashed against the cracked stones of the abandoned chapel nestled in the Carpathians, its stained glass long shattered, leaving only skeletal frames to silhouette the storm. Inside, the air hummed, not with wind but with something older, something restless. Viktor Krum stood near the altar, his broad frames tense beneath a heavy wool coat, eyes fixed on the small wooden box resting between them. Hermione's fingers hovered just above the lid, trembling not from cold, but from the pull she felt in her bones. "It's not just responding," she whispered. "It's listening." Viktor didn't answer at first. He watched the way the shadows clung to her, the way the faint blue light seeping from the box reflected in her wide, dark eyes. The fragments inside, 3 jagged shards of elder wood wrapped in charred silk, had been silent for days. Until now, until they'd argued. "You can't keep pretending this is only about knowledge, Hermione," he said, voice low, roughened by years and distance. "You feel it too, the weight, the hunger." She turned sharply. "Hunger? It's a wand, Viktor. A A tool, dangerous, yes, but not sentient. And yet it woke when you spoke of Dumbledore, pulled harder when I mentioned Grindelwald. His gaze held hers. It knows its history. It remembers those who held it. Perhaps it remembers us. A gust slammed through the broken arches, sending dust spiraling. The box trembled. Then one by one, the fragments lifted, slow, weightless, as if suspended by invisible strings. Blue light flared, not gentle now, but violent, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. Hermione stepped back. That's impossible. They're inert. We tested them. Not inert, Viktor corrected, moving closer to her. Dormant, waiting. The pulses grew faster. The air crackled. A low resonance filled the chamber, a sound like distant thunder, trapped beneath stone. Hermione's breath caught as a memory surged. Dumbledore's hand, pale and withered, reaching for the wand in the astronomy tower. Then another, Viktor, years ago at the Yule Ball, saying her name with quiet reverence. The fragments spun. Magic lashed out, not as a curse, not as a spell, but as raw, untamed emotion. A wave of cold swept over them, followed by heat. Images flickered in the air, blood on snow, a crown of thorns made of wood, a man weeping over a broken staff. This isn't just power, Hermione gasped, clutching her chest. It's memory, all of it, the grief, the pride, the betrayal. It's still alive in the wood. Viktor reached for her hand. His fingers were calloused, warm. And it knows we're divided, that we're afraid. She looked at him then, really looked. Not at the famous seeker, the Durmstrang champion, but at the man who had written her letters in careful script long after the Triwizard Tournament ended. The one who had stood silently at her side during the reconstruction of the Ministry, who had never asked for anything, not even forgiveness for the years lost. "I'm not afraid of the wand," she said, voice breaking. "I'm afraid of what it wants us to become." The light surged again, brighter, angrier. One fragment shot upward, hovering just beneath the crumbling vault of the ceiling. The others followed, circling, forming a triangle of flickering energy. The resonance deepened, shaping into something like a voice, wordless, ancient, aching. Viktor tightened his grip. It's not calling for a master. It's calling for balance. Hermione closed her eyes. She thought of Harry, of Ron, of the quiet life she'd built. Books, tea, mornings, without prophecy. But she also thought of the children in Prague, whose wands had turned to ash, of the healer in Lyon, who'd accidentally reversed time in her clinic by whispering a simple incantation. The wand wasn't broken. It was unmoored. And it knew only what it had always known: conflict, conquest, loss. She opened her eyes, tears glistening. "Then we don't give it power, we give it peace." Viktor nodded. Together they stepped forward, not to seize, not to command, but to stand before the swirling fragments as equals. As two who had loved, lost, and chosen to return. The light softened, the pulses slowed, and for the first time in centuries, the Elder One's remnants did not burn. They breathed. The air in Godric's Hollow was thick, with the scent of damp earth and late autumn decay, leaves crunching underfoot like brittle parchment. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, breath curling in faint wisps before her. She stood at the edge of the ruined stone circle where it had happened, the duel that had changed everything. The century of silence had settled over the place, but tonight the wind carried something else, a low hum, almost beneath hearing, like the echo of a spell still refusing to fade. Viktor stepped beside her, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the moonlight. He didn't speak at first. His dark eyes scanned the broken stones, the scorched earth beneath the ivy, the way the moonlight pooled unnaturally in certain spots, as if drawn there. He knelt, brushing his fingers over a crack in the central slab. A spark leapt from the stone to his skin, blue and silent. "It is not dormant," he said, voice low, accented and steady. "It remembers." Hermione exhaled sharply. "The Elder Wand was never here. Dumbledore didn't have it during the duel." "No," Viktor agreed. "But the power that shaped it, Grindelwald's ambition, Dumbledore's restraint, they met here. Two halves of the same force. This place, it is a fulcrum. A balance point." She frowned. "You think the wand's fragments are drawn to places like this? Sites of magical equilibrium?" He rose, brushing dirt from his gloves. or sites of broken balance. The Elder Wand was never meant to be whole. It is not a tool, it is a test, and every man who held it failed. A gust of wind stirred the trees, and for a moment the helm grew louder. Hermione closed her eyes, listening past the rustle of leaves, past the distant hoot of an owl. Beneath it all there was rhythm, like a heartbeat buried in the earth. She opened her eyes, and the stones seemed to shimmer, just for an instant, with silver light. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Viktor nodded. "The land remembers the magic spilled upon it. Blood magic, ambition, love, regret. All leave traces. This is where Gellert Grindelwald believed he could reshape the world. And Albus Dumbledore chose not to kill him. That choice, so small, so quiet, echoes louder than any curse." Hermione stepped forward, careful not to touch the central stone. "Do you think Dumbledore knew that the wand would keep calling long after he was gone?" "He knew many things," Viktor said, "but even he could not control what outweaves men. Power does not die, it waits." She turned to him. "Then what do we do? Hunt every fragment and destroy them, or let them lie, hoping no one else is tempted?" Viktor looked at her, his gaze steady. "You already know the answer. It is not the wand we must decide about, it is ourselves. Are we collectors of power, or its guardians?" The wind stilled. The hum faded to silence, but in that quiet, Hermione felt something shift, within the earth, within the air, within her. She thought of Harry, of all they'd fought for, of the years spent rebuilding what war had broken. She thought of choice, not destiny, not bloodline, not ancient magic, but the simple crushing weight of choosing rightly. "We don't restore it," she said softly. "We ensure it cannot be." Viktor studied her face, then gave a single nod. "Then we find the fragments, not to wield, to bury, to silence, to let go." He reached into his coat and drew out a small vial filled with dark, swirling ash, the remains of a shard they'd recovered in the Carpathians. Hermione pulled out her own, a sliver of wood wrapped in cloth, taken from a forgotten grave in Transylvania. Together they knelt at the edge of the circle. "This is not a binding," Viktor murmured. "It is a release." Hermione placed the cloth on the ground. Viktor uncorked the vial. The ash swirled, then settled, forming a pattern like a broken spiral. They didn't speak a spell. There was no incantation powerful enough. "Instead," Hermione whispered, "it's enough," and Viktor added, "Let it rest." The earth trembled, once, gently, and the fragments sank, swallowed by soil that closed over them like water. The air sighed, the stars blinked clearer overhead, and somewhere, deep beneath the roots of the world, something ancient exhaled. Rain tapped steadily against the broken windows of the old Durmstrang watchtower, its rhythm steady against the stone, like the pulse of something long buried. The wind carried whispers through the cracks, words in no language Hermione recognized, yet her bones understood. Before them, scattered across the ancient room-carved table, lay 5 jagged fragments of elder wood, each glowing faintly, pulsing in time with their breath. Viktor stood at the opposite end, his face half-shadowed by the dim blue light. He hadn't spoken since they'd placed the last shard. His fingers hovered just above the table, as if afraid to disrupt the air between them. "It's not complete," Hermione said quietly. "But it's close." "It is not about numbers," Viktor replied, voice low. "It is about will, the wand. It remembers. It chooses." She exhaled, her breath catching in the cold. They had followed trails through forgotten monasteries, deciphered bloodline sigils in crumbling Bulgarian tombs, and traced the wand's echoes through generations of silent magic, always just behind, always a step too late. But here, now, the fragments responded to their presence. To them, one by one, the shards trembled. Then, without warning, they lifted floating upward, aligning as if pulled by invisible threads. A soft silver light flared, and the pieces fused, seam by seam, into a single wand, the Elder Wand. Whole for the first time in centuries, Hermione took an involuntary step back. The air thickened, humming with latent power. The runes on the table ignited, spiraling outward in a circle of fire that burned without heat. In the center, the wand hovered, suspended, its tip glowing like a dying star. Viktor didn't move. "It is not for us," he said. "It is not for anyone. But it's here," she whispered. "Why now? Why us?" The wand turned slowly, as if considering them. Then, without sound, it drifted towards Hermione. She held her breath. The stories flooded her mind. Dumbledore's quiet burden, Grindelwald's ambition, Voldemort's ruin. Power such as this had broken kings, twisted hearts, ended lives. She remembered the first time she'd held a wand, the warmth of holly and phoenix feather, the certainty that magic was hers to learn, to shape. This was different. The elder wand stopped before her. She could feel it, not pulling, not demanding, but asking. She reached out, stalked. "No," she said. The wand trembled. "I've spent my life believing magic should be earned," she continued, voice steadier now. "That knowledge matters more than force. That choice, real choice, is the only true power we have." The wand turned again, drifting toward Viktor. He did not reach for it. His dark eyes held a deep sorrow, a lifetime of battles fought in silence. "I have known power," he said, "and I have known loss. This wand, it does not heal. It does not forgive. It only takes." It hovered between them. Then, as if sensing their unspoken agreement, it began to glow brighter, not with arrogance, but with something softer. Resignation? Acceptance? Hermione stepped forward. "We don't want to wield you," she said. "Not to the wand, but to the legacy it carried. We want to end what you began." Viktor nodded. Together they raised their hands, not to claim, but to release. The light flared once, blinding, then collapsed inward. The wand shattered again, not into fragments, but into dust, silver, glowing motes that swirled in the air like fireflies. One landed on Hermione's palm, warm, brief, then gone. Outside the rain stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of peace, of endings, of something ancient finally at rest. The air in the ruined chapel grew thick, humming with a resonance that made Hermione's molars ache. Dust hung suspended, caught in the dim light filtering through cracked stained glass, shards of cobalt and crimson casting fractured patterns across the stone floor. Viktor stood beside her, his breath steady but his fingers tense around the iron-bound journal he'd taken from a Bulgarian crypt 3 nights prior. The symbols etched into its cover now pulsed faintly, a rhythm matching the low thrum beneath their feet. "It is beginning," he said, voice low, eyes scanning the crumbling altar where a single splintered wand lay, no longer than a finger, blackened as if scorched by lightning. Hermione tightened her grip on her own wand. "We stay together. Whatever happens, we don't let go of what's real." But the world folded in. One moment, stone and silence. The next, wind, snow, and a vast sky, streaked with violet auroras. They stood on a mountain ridge, boots sinking into fresh snow, breath pluming in white wisps. Below, a valley stretched frozen and silent except for the whisper of ice, cracking under unseen pressure. "This is not real," Hermione whispered, though her body trembled from the cold. "No," Viktor agreed, "but it feels real. That is the danger." A voice echoed, not from any direction, but from within their skulls. "To master the hollow, you must first be hollow." Hermione spun, wand raised but saw no one. "It's testing us. This is a trial of the mind, or the soul," Viktor murmured. The wind shifted, and suddenly the scene changed. They stood in a great hall, long tables lined with robed figures, whose faces blurred like smoke. At the head of the room, a throne of twisted antler and ash held a man with eyes like polished obsidian. The elder wand rested across his knees, glowing faintly. "Power is not taken," the king throne said. "It is given, it is surrendered." Hermione's pulse quickened. "That's not how Wandor works. Mastery is won, through conquest, through strength." "Is it?" Viktor turned to her, his face unreadable. "Or is that what we have been taught to believe? Grindelwald, then Voldemort, they took. And look where it led. If we don't take control, someone else will," she shot back, but doubt flickered in her gut. The hall dissolved. Now they stood in a forest at twilight, trees towering like sentinels. Between them, a pool of black water reflected not their faces, but their memories. Hermione dueling Bellatrix in the Department of Mysteries. Viktor falling from the sky during the second task, both of them bruised, bleeding, fighting to survive. You have both wielded power in war, the voice whispered. But who did you become in doing so? Hermione stepped back. We did what we had to. Did you? Or did you believe you had no choice? Mastery is not force. It is clarity. It is knowing when to act, and when to let go. A third shift, no landscape this time, but a sensation. Weightlessness. They were floating in darkness, stars blooming around them, each one a pulse of memory, of emotion. Hermione saw Harry's face the night he destroyed the Horcruxes, not with triumph, but with grief. She saw Dumbledore's hand withering from the curse on the ring, his voice trembling as he said, "I was fit for neither conquest nor kingship." And Viktor, he saw his father, a quiet man, who taught him to respect magic, never to command it. "You do not master the wand," Hermione breathed, understanding unfolding like a map in her mind. "The wand masters those who cling to it." Viktor nodded slowly. "It chooses not the strongest, but the one who does not reach for it." The stars dimmed, the vision cracked like ice. They were back in the chapel, gasping, the splintered wand now glowing a soft silver before crumbling into dust. The journal in Viktor's hand snapped shut, its markings faded. Hermione sank to her knees, not from exhaustion, but awe. All this time we've been searching for a way to control it, but the real trial was learning not to want it. Viktor offered her his hand. "Perhaps," he said softly, "the greatest magic is knowing when to walk away." She took his hand, and neither of them looked back at the altar. Dawn bled across the Carpathians in soft streaks of rose and gray, the mountain air sharp with frost and the scent of pine resin. Hermione stirred first, her breath rising in pale wisps as she pushed herself up from the stone slab where they'd collapsed in exhaustion. The chamber beneath the ruined monastery was silent now. No hum of restless magic, no flicker of spectral light across the ancient runes carved into the walls. Only stillness, only peace. She turned her head slowly, watching Viktor where he lay beside her, one arm flung across his chest, the other curled beneath his head. His face, usually so guarded, was open in sleep, lined with fatigue, but unburdened. The storm had passed. They had passed through it. Hermione reached for the satchel at her side, fingers brushing the velvet-wrapped bundle within. She unwound the layers slowly, her breath catching not in fear, but in wonder. The fragments of the Elder Wand lay nestled in the cloth, ivory splinters, once pulsing with violent energy, now dim and quiet. No heat radiated from them. No whispering voices tugged at the edges of her thoughts. They were simply wood and bone, remnants of a legend that had bled too long through history. She exhaled, long and slow. "It's over." Viktor stirred at the sound of her voice, blinking once, then twice, as if relearning the world. He sat up, wincing at the stiffness in his shoulders, and looked to her. "Is it true?" She nodded, holding the fragments between them. "No resonance, no pull. It's dormant." He studied them for a long moment, his dark eyes tracing the jagged lines where the wands had shuddered centuries ago. Then he reached out, not to take them, but to touch the cloth beside them. "We did not destroy it, but we broke its claim. We gave it a choice," she said softly, "and it chose to rest." A faint smile touched his lips. "You always believe in choice, Hermione." She smiled back, though her eyes glistened. "Someone once told me that power is not in the wand, but in the hand that holds it. I think I finally understand what that means." He looked at her then, not just at the witch, the scholar, the hero, but at the woman who had walked through fire, and never let the world harden her. "You were right to come to me," he said, voice low, "not because of the lore, but because you remembered who I was before the fame, before the scars. You remembered the boy who loved books more than Quidditch. And you remembered the girl who talked too much in the library," she said, with a quiet laugh. They sat in silence for a time, the weight of years settling between them, not as a burden, but as something earned. The wind sighed through the cracks in the stone above, carrying with it the scent of snow and distant earth. Somewhere beyond the mountains the world carried on, unaware of what had just been laid to rest beneath the roots of an old forgotten place. After a while, Viktor stood, offering her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. "What now?" he asked. She tucked the fragments back into the satchel, wrapping them carefully. "We returned them, not to a vault, not to a museum, but to the earth, where they began. He nodded. And the bloodlines? The others who carry traces of its magic? We write it down, she said. We tell the truth, no more myths, no more oaths of secrecy. Let the next generation decide what to do with the past. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, there was no shadow in his gaze, only clarity. You are braver than any warrior. She stepped closer, just enough, and you're wiser than any scholar. The moment stretched, fragile and full. Then he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch feather light. If we are writing truths, know this, I never stopped thinking of you. She leaned into his hand just slightly. Then maybe we have more to reconcile than just history. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the windows of the ministry's underground atrium, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of London and made gas lamps shiver like distant stars. The marble floors gleamed under the enchanted chandeliers, their light dulled by the weight of the hour. Few witches and wizards remained at this late hour. Most had gone home, satisfied with the official report stamped and filed, the anomalies declared neutralized, the danger extinguished. Hermione stood at the edge of the atrium, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, a folder tucked beneath one arm. The words on the final page still burned behind her eyes, magical disturbances contained. No further action required. She had signed it. So had hid. Viktor stood a few paces away, his silhouette stark against the dim glow of the Flu Network's dying embers. He hadn't spoken since they left the conference room. His hands were buried in the pockets of his long coat, his expression unreadable, but she knew him well enough now, knew the way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back, the slight tilt of his head when he was listening to a silence deeper than sound. You don't believe it either, she said, not turning to look at him. No, he answered simply. She exhaled, slow and measured. Then why cite it? Because the ministry wants peace, he said, voice low, and peace is easier with a story that ends. She turned then, studying his face. The years had carved lines beside his eyes, not from age, but from thought, from nights spent poring over crumbling texts in cold, forgotten libraries. His dark hair was shorter now, brushed with silver at the temples, but his gaze was unchanged, steady, quiet, knowing. We left pieces behind, she said. Fragments in the Carpathians. The bloodline in Prague never answered our summons. And the wand was never whole to begin with, he finished. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but thick with understanding. They had stood together in the ruins beneath the old monastery, where the earth hummed with buried magic, and watched as the last shard of elder wood dissolved into ash. It hadn't shattered, it had chosen to vanish, as if releasing itself. The elder wand isn't a weapon, Hermione murmured. Not really. It's a witness. Viktor nodded once, to choices, to men who thought power could be mastered, but it only remembers those who let it go. She looked down at the folder in her hands. The truth was still in there, buried beneath bureaucratic language and cautious omissions. The truth that the wand had not been destroyed, nor reclaimed, but that its spirit, its essence, had scattered. That every burst of wild magic across Europe had not been a warning, but a return, a homecoming. And somewhere, in the quiet places, the forests of Transylvania, the stone circles of Scotland, the river banks of the Danube, pieces of it were sleeping again, nestled in roots and soil, waiting. Will you go back? She asked. To Bulgaria. For a time, there is a monastery near Rila that holds records. Older than Hogwarts. They speak of wand-makers who didn't craft tools but companions. She smiled faintly. You always did have a way of finding the things others overlook. He looked at her then, really looked, and there was something unspoken in his eyes, something that had lived between them for years, quiet and patient, like a spell waiting to be cast. And you, he said, will you stay? For now, there's still work, files to close, reports to write, lies to soften into truths. He stepped closer, just one step, and pulled a small object from his coat, a smooth piece of wood, no longer than her thumb, dark and warm to the touch. She recognized it at once, the shard they had found beneath the altar, the one that had pulsed once in Viktor's hand before falling still. I kept this, he said, not to hold, but to remember. She reached out, not taking it, just letting her fingers hover above it. "What do you think it wants?" "Rest," he said, "and perhaps to be forgiven." She nodded, closing her eyes. The rain outside had softened to a whisper. Somewhere in the city, a clock struck midnight. When she opened her eyes, he was already stepping into the flue, the green flames curling around him like a breath. "Goodbye, Hermione. Goodbye, Viktor." And then he was gone. She stood there a while longer, the empty hearth before her, the weight of the unsaid heavy in her chest. Then slowly, she tucked the Wolder Arumber and hearth and walked toward the lift, her boots clicking against the stone. The truth would wait. For now, that was enough. The bell above the door chimed softly, a single clear note that hung in the still morning air, like a held breath. Viktor Krum stepped inside the narrow shop, his boots leaving damp prints on the worn oak floor. Rain had fallen through the night, and Sophia woke slow and glistening, mist curling around the rooftops like smoke from an old fire. He set down the satchel of wood scraps and unrolled it carefully on the workbench. Oak hawthorn, a splinter of rowan, still smelling of frost. The scent of raw timber filled the room, sharp and honest. He ran a calloused thumb along the grain of a birch shaft, feeling the subtle resistance, the hidden pulse in the fibers. Wand-making was not magic, not really, not the kind people thought of. Spells, explosions, glory. It was patience. It was listening. A wand chose, yes, but so too did the maker, and Viktor had learned over years in silence how to listen. The shop was small, tucked between a baker and a bookseller in the old quarter. No sign proclaimed his name, no advertisements fluttered from the window. Only a single display case held 3 finished wands, each wrapped in simple cloth, their cores labeled in careful script: dragon heartstring, Fila hair, phoenix feather. People found him anyway. Word had spread quietly, as such things do. Among the quiet ones, the ones who didn't want wands for power, but for balance. He lit the small forge in the corner, the flame catching with a soft whoosh. The heat bloomed across his face, familiar as a memory. Began shaping the birch, carving with a blade that had been his grandfather's. Each stroke was deliberate. No rush, no audience, no one to impress. A knock came at midday. A girl, no older than 12, stood in the doorway, her cloak dripping onto the mat. Her eyes were wide, not with awe, but with something deeper, fear, maybe, or hope. "My wand," she whispered. "It broke when I tried to mend the roof during a storm." Viktor nodded. He did not ask her name. Not yet. He held out his hand, and she placed the splintered piece in his palm. Cherry wood, unicorn hair core. He felt the echo of her magic in it, thin and trembling, like a bird's heartbeat. "Come," he said gently. "Sit." He did not fix it. Not at first. Instead, he asked her to tell him about the storm, about the roof, about the animals in the barn below. She spoke haltingly at first, then with growing ease. Wand-making, he had come to understand, was not repair. It was witness. The wood had not broken because of the spell. It had broken because it could not hold what she had tried to give. So he carved a new shaft, not from cherry, but from willow, soft and forgiving. He let her watch, let her touch the wood before the core was set. When the unicorn hair hummed softly as it nestled into the groove, she gasped. "It knows me," she breathed. Viktor smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. It was waiting. She left with the wand wrapped in linen, her steps lighter than when she came. Viktor closed the shutters soon after, lit a single lamp, and sat with a cup of strong tea. Outside, the city murmured, distant and unbothered. He thought of Hogwarts, of shouting crowds, of the roar of the Quidditch pitch. He thought of duels fought and won, of eyes upon him, expectant, hungry. He had carried greatness like a weight once. Now the silence was a gift. His fingers brushed the edge of a small drawer beneath the bench. Inside, wrapped in black cloth, lay a fragment of elder wood, no longer than his palm, cold to the touch, quiet, for now. He did not open the drawer. Not today. Today there were only the shavings on the floor, the scent of wood smoke, and the piece of a craft done for its own sake. The flicker of candlelight danced across the parchment, casting long, wavering shadows over the stack of files spread across her desk. Outside, the London drizzle whispered against the windowpane, a soft, insistent rhythm that matched the quiet turning of Hermione's thoughts. She dipped her quill into the inkwell, hesitated, then set it down again. The ministry correspondence could wait. Her eyes lingered on a faded envelope marked Department of Mysteries, Restricted Acquisition Log, 1998, the year she'd last seen him. She remembered the quiet intensity in Viktor's gaze when they'd met at the Triwizard Tournament, how he'd looked at her like she was a riddle worth solving. Not admiration born of fame, but something deeper. Curiosity, respect. She'd been too young then to understand it. Too consumed by war, by duty, by a world tipping off its axis. Now, years later, his letter had arrived like a ghost from a past she'd carefully archived. Not love letters, never that, but a scholarly inquiry, precise and measured, about anomalous wand signatures in the Carpathians. The kind of thing only someone steeped in Eastern European wand lore would notice, and only someone who still remembered her mind would think to write. She traced the edge of the envelope with her thumb, the paper brittle with age. Mastery. The word echoed in her mind, not as triumph, but as burden. She'd read everything on the Elder Wand, the accounts of madness, of betrayal, of power that consumed those who claimed to control it. Dumbledore had warned that mastery wasn't about possession, but sacrifice, and yet so many had sought it like a prize, a weapon to crown the victor. But what did it mean to master something that refused to be tamed? She thought of Harry, his quiet refusal to keep the wand after the war. "It's not mine," he'd said. "It never was." He'd snapped it, then buried the pieces beneath the ruins of Hogwarts' West Tower. Symbolic, perhaps, but not final. Magic like that didn't die. It slept, waited, and now it was waking. Reports had come in, spontaneous transfigurations in Prague, a broomstick assembling itself from splinters in a Bulgarian attic, a child in Transylvania who'd conjured a Patronus without a wand, without incantation. Patterns too similar to be coincidence. The ministry dismissed them as residual magic, post-war echoes. But Hermione knew better. Magic didn't linger like that. Not without a source. And Viktor had seen the pattern first. She closed her eyes and saw him again, standing on the platform at King's Cross, snow in his hair, his voice low and careful, as he said, "If you ever need help, Hermione, you know where to find me." She hadn't written, not then. Life had pulled her in other directions. Books, policy reform, the slow rebuilding of a world still flinching from Voldemort's shadow. But now the past wasn't just history. It was a thread, tugging insistently at the present. She reached for the topmost file, her own research, compiled over months. Maps dotted with red pins, genealogical charts of old wand-maker families, fragments of incantations and forgotten dialects. Somewhere in these lines was a lineage, a bloodline tied to the original makers of the Death Stick. Not owners, bearers. Those who hadn't claimed power, but carried it. Was mastery, then, not dominance, but stewardship? The candle guttered. A draft slipped through the cracks in the window frame, rustling the papers. One sheet fluttered to the floor. She bent to pick it up. A sketch of the Elder Wand's core, based on Ollivander's notes. Beneath it, in her handwriting, "Power chooses, but choice defines the master." She exhaled slowly. Maybe Viktor hadn't just written to discuss wand lore. Maybe he'd written because he, too, had spent years wondering what it meant to be chosen by something greater than oneself. And maybe, just maybe, some bonds weren't meant to be buried with old wands. Rain tapped against the window pane of Hermione's study in Grimmauld Place, a steady rhythm like fingers drumming on glass. The room smelled of old parchment and bergamot tea gone cold. A single candle flickered on the desk, casting long shadows across the stacks of books, pulled from the Black family library. Tomes on wand lore, blood oaths, and the forgotten lineages of magical artifacts. She sat hunched forward, elbows on wood, her hands trembling slightly as she held a braille slip of parchment between her fingers. It had been tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard, one of Dumbledore's personal editions donated to the Ministry archives after his death. It should not have been there. It had not been catalogued. And yet, when Viktor had requested access to the collection, citing a hunch about resonant enchantments and inherited objects. This had fallen out like a secret refusing to stay buried. The ink was faded but unmistakably his, a looping, elegant hand. The words slanted forward as if eager to outrun time. "My dear Alara," it began, and Hermione caught her breath. Alara Wara, not Minerva, not Severus, a name no one knew, a woman no history recorded. The letter was undated, unsent, perhaps never meant to be delivered. If you are reading this, then I have failed in my silence. Forgive me. I write not in regret, but in warning. The wand I carry is not mine by right, nor by wisdom. It chose no man, only the desperate, the proud, the broken. I have studied its history, traced its path through blood and betrayal, and I have come to understand, it does not serve. It tests, and it feeds on mastery the way a leech feeds on blood. She paused, pressing the edge of the parchment to her lips. Outside, thunder rolled low across the London sky. I once believed I could hold its power without becoming its prisoner. I believed that intention, pure, noble intention, might be enough. But power such as this does not care for virtue. It cares only for dominance. I have mastered death, in theory, yet in truth, I have fled from it. I have clung to life, to influence, to control, and in doing so, I have become a thief of time, a hoarder of second chances. Hermione closed her eyes. She had seen this before, in the way Harry still woke, sometimes gasping from dreams of the forest, in the way Ron flinched at sudden silences, in the way she herself double-checked every spell, every charm, as if one misstep might unravel the world again. Viktor had said the same thing only last week, standing in the ruins of an old Bulgarian watchtower, where a shard of yew wood had pulsed with unnatural warmth. "Is not power," he'd said, voice low, "what you do with magic, is what magic do with you." She turned the letter over, as if more might be hidden in the fibers of the page. But there was only one more paragraph. "I fear my death will not be an end, but a beginning. That the wand will pass again and again, until someone learns to let go. Not destroy it, though I have considered it, not hide it, though I have tried, but to lay it down, willingly, to choose mercy over mastery. That, I believe, is the final magic. It cannot corrupt. If you remember nothing else of me, Alara, remember this. The greatest power is the power refused." The candle guttered. Hermione let the letter fall to the desk, as though it had grown too hot to hold. Her thoughts turned to the reports, witches in Transylvania, whose wands had sparked with unfamiliar blue fire, a boy in Salzburg, who'd transfigured his entire house into a flock of ravens without incantation, the old Orlov family crypt in the Carpathians, now humming with silent energy. It wasn't just the wand's fragments stirring. It was the idea of it, the hunger. She looked at the quill beside her, the inkwell open, the blank page waiting. A response, perhaps, to no one, to everyone. To the ghost of a woman who may have once loved a man who carried death in his pocket, but she did not write. Instead, she folded Dumbledore's letter carefully, tucked it into her robes, and stood. There were things more dangerous than lost magic, and one of them was fighting it again. The air in the vault was too still, as if time itself hesitated beneath the stone arches. Hermione stood just inside the threshold, breath caught between her ribs, eyes fixed on the empty pedestal where the final shard of the Elder Wand had rested for 3 days and 7 hours. No alarm had sounded, no spell had flared. It had simply gone, not shattered, not stolen, gone, like mist drawing into morning light. She stepped forward, fingers brushing the obsidian surface of the pedestal, cold, dry, no residue of magic, no lingering warmth. She had cast detection charms every hour. She had layered the vault with monitoring runes, borrowed from Bulgarian grimoires Viktor had translated for her. And yet, nothing had warned her. "It is not gone," a voice said behind her, low and measured. "It has returned." Hermione turned. Viktor stood in the doorway, rainwater dripping from the hem of his cloak, his face shadowed beneath the hood. He didn't enter. Not yet. He studied the pedestal, the corners of his eyes tightening as if in recognition. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded once. "I woke this morning with a taste of old ash on my tongue, the kind that lingers after lightning strikes oak. It is how the wand speaks, when it chooses. She wrapped her arms around herself, the stone walls pressing in. "We collected them all, Viktor. Every fragment, every splinter. We followed the bloodlines, traced the magic through centuries. We were supposed to decide its fate, not watch it slip through our fingers like this. It was never ours to hold," he said, stepping forward at last. His boots echoed softly against the stone. "The wand was never a thing to be possessed. Not by Grindelwald, not by Dumbledore, not even by you or me. It is memory, it is choice, and it remembers who met at rest." Hermione closed her eyes. Images flickered. Dumbledore's grave beneath the moonlight, the hawthorn wand buried with him, the quiet grief in Harry's voice when he'd said, "If can stay with him," she had argued then, protested. But Harry had been certain. And now, this. "The last fragment," she whispered. "It was from the wand's core, wasn't it? The Aether shard from the Carpathians. The one buried with the shepherd who refused to fight." Viktor's gaze softened. Yes, he held it for 50 years and never cast a killing curse. Never sought power. He used it to mend fences, to light fires, to guide lost sheep home. When he died, the wand did not resist. It slept in his grave like a child in shadow. And we dug it up. We did, he said, no judgment in his voice, because we feared what would happen if it woke unguarded. And yet it left anyway. "Because it was ready," Viktor said. "And because we were not trying to keep it. Not truly. You kept your hands open, Hermione. Even when you feared what it might do." She looked at him then, really looked. Rain still clung to his dark lashes. There were new lines around his eyes, burned by years and distance, but his presence still carried that quiet certainty, the kind that had anchored her during the Triwizard Tournament, during whispered conversations under foreign stars. "I thought we were meant to destroy it," she admitted. "Or bind it. Seal it away. And if we had," he asked, "what would that have said about us?" The question settled like dust. She thought of power, of fear, of the way the Ministry whispered about reclaiming it. She thought of Harry, who had walked away, of Snape, who had served love more than glory, of Dumbledore, who had known the wand's hunger, and still chosen humility. "I think," she said slowly, "that maybe the wand doesn't choose the strongest. Maybe it chooses the one who knows when to let go." Viktor smiled then, a small, sad, beautiful thing. "Then it has already chosen its final master." Outside, the rain eased. A single beam of pale sunlight pierced the clouds above the cliffs, glancing off the sea like a silver thread. And somewhere, deep in soil or stream or silence, the elder wand slept again. Not broken, not buried, just resting. As it should. Rain tapped softly against the slanted glass of Viktor's workshop window, each drop catching the dim glow of candlelight like fleeting stars. The air smelled of beeswax, old parchment, and the faint metallic tang of charred wood, residue from recent experiments. Hermione stepped inside, brushing damp curls from her forehead, her boots leaving faint smudges on the worn oak floor. She paused, letting her eyes adjust to the low light, taking in the quiet hum of simmering flasks and the occasional flicker of blue flame beneath a copper alembic. "Viktor," she called, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile balance of the room. From behind a stack of leather-bound tomes, a shadow shifted. Viktor emerged, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles perched low on his nose, his face lit with quiet recognition, not quite a smile, but something warmer, an acknowledgment that needed no words. "You came," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth already stained with ink and ash. "Of course I did," Hermione replied, stepping farther in. "You said you'd found something different." He nodded, motioning toward a low table where a shard of wood lay atop a velvet cloth. It was small, no longer than her thumb, and unnaturally dark, like a sliver of storm cloud given form. Around it intricate runes had been drawn in chalk, forming a containment circle etched into the wood. "This was found near the Black Sea," Viktor said. "Buried beneath a ruined temple, they say, untouched for centuries. A fisherman uncovered it during a storm. When he touched it, the sea boiled for 3 minutes, then stopped." Hermione's breath caught. "That's impossible, is it?" Viktor tilted his head. "You know what this is." She did. The grain, the subtle warp in the wood, the way it seemed to drink the candlelight, rather than reflect it. There was only one that had ever looked like that. It's a fragment of the Elder Wand. Not just any fragment, Viktor corrected. This piece came from the core. I tested it with dragon's blood and moonstone ash. It responded, not like a memory, like a pulse. Hermione stepped closer, her fingers hovering just above the shard. She felt it then, a faint vibration in the air, almost like a whisper beneath her skin. It's not dormant. No, Viktor said. It's waking. She looked at him, really looked. The years had lined his face, softened his once sharp features, but his eyes were unchanged, dark, intent, full of a quiet wisdom that had always unsettled her in the best way. Why now, after all this time? He exhaled slowly. Perhaps it was never truly broken. Just waiting, and now, something calls to it. Or someone, perhaps both. He hesitated. There are other fragments, scattered. I've traced whispers, unexplained magic in the Carpathians, a child in Bulgaria who summoned fire without a wand. These are not coincidences. Hermione wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. If the wand is reassembling itself, we could be facing another war. Or, Viktor said softly, we could be facing a choice. She turned to him. What choice? To answer its call, he said, or to silence it forever. Some power was never meant to be mastered. Outside, the rain slowed. A single beam of moonlight broke through the clouds, slicing across the table, illuminating the shard. For a breath, it gleamed, deep and hungry and alive, and in that moment, Hermione felt it. Not just the pull of magic, but the weight of what they might have to do. And the quiet pull between them, years in the making, flickered like a candle in the dark. Rain tapped gently against the window pane of the small cottage nestled in the Carpathian foothills, a soft rhythm that wrapped the night in hush. Inside, firelight danced across the walls, casting long shadows that swayed like old friends relearning each other's movements. The scent of bergamot and honey curled through the air, warm and familiar, as Hermione cradled her teacup between her palms, letting the heat seep into her skin. Across from her, Viktor sat with one leg drawn up, his elbow resting on his knee. He watched the fire more than he spoke, but there was no discomfort in the silence. It had been hours since they'd last mentioned the Elder Wand, and neither of them had brought it up again. Not since the map had been rolled away, the notes tucked into the leather satchel by the door, and the truth of ancient bloodlines laid bare like open books under moonlight. You still take your tea like a proper Englishwoman, he said at last, his voice low, tinged with amusement. She glanced up, surprised. How's that? Too much sugar, not enough courage. She laughed, the sound light, unexpected. Says the man who drinks his black as coal and claims it builds character. He grinned, the gesture slow and rare, like the first crack of dawn after a long night. It does. You should try it sometime. I'll stick to sweetness, thank you. She blew across the rim of her cup. Besides, I've had enough bitterness in my life. Tea shouldn't add to it. The room softened at her words. Viktor looked at her. Then, not with the intensity of a scholar, or the weight of a mission, but simply, as someone who had known her long enough to recognize the quiet lines of fatigue beneath her eyes, the way her fingers still trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching. He reached for the kettle, and poured her more tea without asking. The gesture was small, but it carried years. She nodded her thanks, not meeting his gaze, but her fingers curled a little tighter around the porcelain, as if grounding herself. Outside the wind shifted, rustling the bare branches of an old oak. A log cracked in the hearth, sending up a shower of amber sparks. Neither moved? Do you remember, he began, that winter in Bulgaria, where the tournament was over, and you came to visit? We walked in the snow for hours and you lectured me about elf rights the entire time. She smiled, eyes distant. You pretended to fall asleep just to annoy me. I did not. I was cold, and you were very loud. Loud? Me? Very, he chuckled. But I liked it. It made the cold feel alive. She looked at him then, really looked, seeing not the famed seeker, or the solitary scholar, but the boy who had once written her clumsy letters in shaky script, the man who had stood by her side when the world was simpler, when magic still felt like wonder, and not responsibility. You never answered my last letter, she said softly. He exhaled long and slow. I know. She didn't press. The years had taught her the weight of unspoken things. Some wounds don't need words to heal. After a moment he said, "I kept them, all of them, your letters." Her breath caught just slightly. "Why didn't you?" "I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid that if I wrote back, I would say too much, or not enough." And then time passed, and it felt too late. "It was never too late," she whispered. He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat the room held its breath. Then, quietly, he reached into the pocket of his coat, and pulled out a small, worn envelope, its edges frayed, the ink faded. He didn't hand it to her, just held it between his fingers as if testing its weight. "I wrote one," he said. "Years ago, never sent it." She didn't reach for it, didn't speak. Just let the moment linger, fragile as frost on glass. And in the silence, with the rain still falling and the fire still burning, they understood. Some things don't need to be said. Some things simply are. Rain tapped against the window panes of the small cottage nestled in the Carpathian foothills, a steady rhythm like the breath of the earth. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting long shadows across the stone walls, lined with scrolls, leather-bound tomes, and the single, unassuming wooden box resting on the oak table. Viktor Krum sat in silence, his fingers tracing the edge of an old parchment, a genealogical chart, marked with names long forgotten. Ink faded as if reluctant to be read. Across from him, Hermione Granger stirred her tea, the steam curling like whispered secrets into the air. "It's strange," she said softly, "how something so powerful can leave such quiet traces. No thunder, no blazing light. Just a child lighting a candle with a thought. A broom that flies without a rider. A well that runs dry when no one's drawing from it." Viktor nodded, eyes never leaving the parchment. "Power does not always shout, Hermione. Sometimes it waits, listens. Like a wolf in winter." She studied him. The deep lines of the corners of his eyes. The way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking. Years had passed since they'd last stood together beneath the fluttering banners of Durmstrang, since the Yule Ball and the clumsy tender words spoken in broken English, and even more fragile hope. Now those moments felt like dreams half remembered upon waking. Fragile, but real. The box on the table pulsed faintly, a soft blue light seeping through its seams. Not a sound, but a sensation. A hum beneath the skin, like the summary of a heartbeat. "They believe the Elder Wand was master of death," she murmured. But what if it was never about mastery at all? What if it was about surrender? Viktor looked up at her then, his dark eyes searching. "You think it seeks rest?" "I think it's tired," she said. "And maybe, so are we." He rose slowly, moving to the hearth. From the mantel he took a small, twisted branch, petrified wood, barked black, as if scorched by time. One of the fragments they'd collected, not the wand, not whole, but a piece of its story. "When I was a boy," he began, voice low, "my grandfather told me of a tree that grew in the valley behind our village. Ancient, hollow at the core. People left offerings, ribbons, coins, letters, believing it could carry wishes to the other side. One winter, lightning struck it, split it clean in two. We thought it dead. But come spring, a single green shoot rose from the ash." He turned to her. "Some things are not meant to be wielded, only witnessed." Hermione stood stepping closer. The air between them thickened, not with magic, but with something older, understanding perhaps, or the quiet courage of letting go. "We could bind the fragments," she said. "Seal them, not destroy, that would be violence, but return them, to earth, to silence, to peace," he added. She smiled then, small and true. "It's funny, all this time we've been chasing power, solving riddles, fearing what the wand might do in the wrong hands. But maybe the real danger wasn't in its use. It was in the wanting." Outside the rain slowed. A sliver of moon broke through the clouds, silvering the wet grass, glinting off the ridge of distant mountains. They walked together to the edge of the forest at dawn, the box cradled between them. No incantations, no grand spells, just two people placing the remnants of an old weary magic into the roots of a fallen oak, one that had lived, died, and now rotted into the soil, feeding new life. As they stepped back, the air stilled. The hum ceased. The world exhaled. No triumph, no fanfare. only the wind, gentle through the leaves, and for the first time in years, it felt like enough.